One day there was a brutal murder in a hotel right in the middle of the night. A young boy brought a knife with him and without question killed a grown man, stabbing him several times in the chest. At that moment, the young man thought that now it was finally over. This story is about one man's revenge. This man committed murder, but was reborn in a new world and became a hero. To put it more correctly, he could be called a murderer, but if you look into his past, he started killing for revenge. The dead bodies that lay near him were all victims of his revenge. The victims were criminals who were trying to escape retribution. However, this guy sinned and killed them himself. The young man spent 5 years to achieve his goal. But after his revenge, he had no sense of a fulfilled promise. He only indulged his desires under the cause of revenge. In the end, there was one last step left to be taken to end it all. With these thoughts, the boy brought the tip of the knife to his throat and in spite of his pain began to press it under his skin. With a sharp movement he opened his own throat, after which he collapsed near the criminals. The suicide was not an attempt to punish himself for what he had done or a desire to escape retribution. It was an attempt to end this cycle of unending vengeance. The hero remembered the time 5 years ago when he had killed the last bit of his own soul within him. Now it seemed to him that it was surely his end, and before he died he remembered the person closest to him, a girl named Tova. From the great loss of blood the guy began to faint, thinking that this was the end of his adventure for revenge. This is exactly how his story should have ended. In the last few seconds, he began to allow thoughts that this might have been wrong. Some voice in his head spoke to him and said that the guy probably shouldn't have wasted his life this way. The hero fell into a dream in which his body became weightless and floated among strange codes. A dead silence hung over the nighttime abandoned hotel where the murder had occurred. After a while, the guy woke up. He had to come to his senses quickly, because the place in which he found himself seemed to him quite strange. The hero did not understand how this was possible, because he was supposed to stay in an abandoned hotel. But this place was like an abandoned ruined palace. It was quite spacious, and the rays of the sun peeked through the columns. There was also a large statue of an angel here that had tilted to the side and lost part of its body and wing. Without realizing anything, the young man looked at his body. The wound on his neck was gone, but he remembered exactly the moment he slit his throat. He wasn't wearing his jacket, nor was his wallet and cell phone in it. The boy looked at the knife he still had from that incident. It was the only thing that had carried over with him. In that case, the hero decided to repeat his situation and brought the point of the knife to his throat with confidence. The guy thought that everything would be fine now. It didn't matter who he really was anymore. He didn't care what had happened to him, for all that was left was what he had to do. Suddenly someone's voice told anyone who wanted death to get out of here. No sooner had the guy stabbed himself than the object shattered into small shards. The hero thought it had just broken, but it was more accurate to say that his knife had crumbled. The guy didn't think he was worried enough to break such an object on his own. Footsteps were heard on the stairs. The person who was coming down to the hero asked him if she should have stopped him. It was a young long-haired girl. Outwardly, she looked like an adventurer and was quite beautiful. She smiled, thinking that she had scared the guy. The girl explained that she had just used magic and hoped the hero realized it. The pretty girl introduced herself to the hero and asked the guy about his name. The hero still didn't realize where they were, so he wanted to ask her something. He still doubted that all this was happening in reality. Shiro wanted to know what his name was, but the guy ignored her question and said he was just in his other place. The girl kept repeating her question until she was right in front of his face. The hero didn't understand at all what was going on and asked her a question. Shiro continued to smile, and while pointing her finger at the hero, she asked about his name. The guy had to introduce himself, and he called himself Kiruno. The girl thought about it and suggested that he use an abbreviated name called Kuro. Since they were in this world, Japanese names were not suitable here. Kuro didn't understand at all what the Shiro was talking about and started with questions. The girl told him that there were so-called inoralders here. In this world, people like him were reborn. Appearing people from other worlds was not new here. Kuro didn't understand what foreigners and rebirths she was talking about. He decided to clarify if they were really on Earth, and Shiro replied that he was wrong. The hero quickly realized that he was now in a different world than the one he had lived in before. Shiro was glad he figured it out so quickly, but if he had been more surprised, he would have looked cuter. Shiro clarified that she too was from another world, but here from now on she would be Kuro's guide. The guy didn't understand why the person who was supposed to be his guide was trying to stop him during his suicide attempt. Shiro lowered her head and said that it would be as pointless as starting a game without warning. That's why out of kindness she stopped him. The hero's patience burst. Bringing the knife to Shiro's face, he said that was no answer. Still smiling, the girl raised her hands in front of her and said that in all likelihood it was suicide. She wanted to know the reason why he committed suicide, but Kuro replied that it was none of her business. Shiro thought the same, but she had a reason why she stopped him. He must have heard a voice speaking to him. That voice thought that Kuro shouldn't have wasted his life like that. The boy was surprised when he heard it from Shiro. The girl was sure that he had heard something like that when he got here, because every other alien had heard such a voice. Shiro thought it was because she had been in an accident and died. Then she was told that it was a real pity, but people that tried to commit suicide heard about a wasted life. Shiro probably thought it was all for nothing. That was the reason why she stopped Kuro. Shiro smiled and thought that it wasn't enough for him. The guy was proving to be quite the pain in one place, so she decided to add that as a bonus. Shiro introduced him to the world that was called Arkwire. This world would look very ordinary since there were many reborns that lived here. Also, there are two things that are common to everyone in this world. The first thing is language. The second thing was about his past life. No matter how miserable it was, he was given a second chance, so he could use it and live happily. There was no way the hero could forget that terrible picture with his murdered sister in front of his eyes. Her beaten and emaciated naked body was thrown into the snow where she died. Suddenly, an overwhelming thought popped into his head that kept him awake. Shiro offered to follow her in order for her to introduce him to this world. Suddenly, the hero grabbed her arm and stopped her. Shiro looked back at Kuro in surprise, not realizing what was wrong. She stared at Kuro, who decided to ask her about the girl named Toa. The boy hoped that she had heard something about her. At the words about someone important to him, Kuro's eyes flashed with hope. This whole story is about a man who was given a second chance to live a peaceful life. If you go back in the past of Kuro, a pop-up in Arkulea, the protagonist had a twin sister when he was young. The sister constantly smiled at her brother and thought he was slow. She was very beautiful and passers-by would often stop to look at her. She was a bright personality and also popular. Toa was completely different from the hero, who was quite mediocre. He was proud to call her his beautiful sweet sister. However, a short time later, she was killed. By the time the boy was able to get to the scene, his little sister had already passed away. It was evident that the frozen corpse bore the marks of extreme violence. On days like this, the hero would usually return home smiling with his sister, but this was not the case. The regret he felt was eating him up from the inside to the point of suicide. However, he could not just forget about the people who caused his sister's death. So later Kuro killed them. He found out that the culprits were a group of guys, and finally, after 5 years, he successfully made contact. After he succeeded in taking revenge, he committed suicide, thus ending the tragedy of revenge. At least that's how it was supposed to be. When the hero came to his senses, he saw Shiro's face in front of him. The guy was lying on her lap, and the girl was glad that he finally woke up and smiled at him. She wanted to make sure he was alright. Shiro was surprised that the guy suddenly fainted, but she couldn't just leave him, so she brought him to this place. The hero wanted to know where he had gotten to and asked Shiro a question. The girl welcomed him to the Pavilion of Life. It was a rather large house that had 2 floors. When the guy came to his senses and went downstairs, he saw a small bar. There were people partying downstairs and ordering drinks and food for themselves. Hiro became convinced that this was indeed another world. He thought that there might have been other people like him who died, were reborn and came here. One of the local guys called out to the newcomer and laughed. He thought the hero had some pretty weird stats, but Kuro didn't understand what he was talking about. Shira apologized to the hero for waiting and put a drink on his table. During this time, Shira had already managed to change into her waitress costume. She told the hero that this was the place where she worked and lived. Hiro sat down on a chair and apologized for disturbing her. Shira thought he was pretty honest, and maybe he changed his mind. The boy was surprised when Shira suddenly asked him about the identity of the Toa. She was curious to know who she was. After he fainted, he mumbled it in his sleep and kept repeating the name. Judging from the last name, they were related to her. Hiro replied that it was his younger sister who died 5 years ago. He speculated that his younger sister might have been reborn in this world and wanted to find out from Shiro. Shira replied that it was quite possible, as this was a world where unfortunate people were reborn. The Shiro had a few clues to start with. Hiro wanted to get up from his chair, but Shiro asked him to listen to her before doing so. Toa was quite the common name, and they could use another name. They also didn't know if there was a younger sister of his in this world, so even if they were to look for her, it might be a waste of time. This probably didn't stop the hero, and he still wanted to find out about his sister. Shira replied that she only knew 4 people with that name. There is a witch named Comrade in the land of Mariku, and there is a skillful magician named Toazu in the land of Irusoto. In a country called Jedendora there is a Midora who directs the knighthood. Finally, in another country called Darutora there is an appointed red hero named Tavai Reitsu. The hero asked if she knew anything about their appearance or age. The girl replied that she didn't know much about age. The time here could also be different from the one he lived in, so there was nothing that could be done about it. So far, the hero had met a man named Tavai Reitsu. He realized that there were also completely different nations here. He knew it would be difficult, so he didn't mind going alone. Shira suggested starting the conversation with what a hero was. When visitors were reborn, they would receive a status adjustment. A lot of things could change from the customization. For example, one could become a blessedly talented user, magi, or gain an incredibly strong body. There was a section of visitors who got a great setup. They used their strengths to make great contributions to the nation. Although it is only once in a lifetime, if these achievements are recognized by the royal family, the rewards range from receiving a Medal of Honor to being awarded a noble title. The being who protects the world of the Archulea has been called a hero since mythical times. At any rate, Shiro realized that they were amazing guys. The hero thought that it would not be easy to meet them and asked to tell him about the example of contribution. Nothing came to the girl's mind, but if she gave a minimum requirement, it would be conquering a dungeon. In this world, there were dungeons where monsters appeared as well as challenges. By defeating a particular enemy in a dungeon, one could obtain an item with marvelous power. It was known as magical equipment. If he offered it to the country, he would receive an honorable title and an invitation from the heroes. There were demons in the dungeon. That was the part she didn't like. Even if all the details surprised him, Kuro had no choice. Shiro just remembered that she had to give him something. She put some contact lenses on the table that could improve his eyesight. Shiro explained that this way the hero would get many benefits by wearing them. She offered to help him, but Kuro said he would do it himself. Shiro smiled and said he would see it soon, as well as many other things. As soon as the guy put on the lenses, he had a new check-in. Suddenly, he saw a lot of system windows with descriptions flying right beside the rest of the people. The guy was clearly surprised by this sight. Shiro explained that people in this world live with this vision. It was called interface glasses or simple glasses. They could give him information about the people he saw as long as that information was available. They could project documents and the ability to send and receive messages. The hero compared it to games. Shiro suggested that Kuro try silently thinking about showing his stats and information. The guy closed his eyes and thought about it, then confirmed the information about the registrar. After that, his own stats opened in front of his eyes. It showed his name, class, basic status, and other things. Apparently, he already possessed innate and acquired level 1 skills. His professional magic attribute was black. He possessed curse, sin department, reward, and equipment. Shiro smiled and said that the goggles could read and show information about a player's equipment. Everyone started at level 1, but his stats were surprisingly high. The hero realized why that man was so surprised. His professional magic attribute was black. He also had sinful deed and mind pollution, but the Kuro didn't understand what it all meant. He noticed another interesting icon that said something about divine blessing. It said something about an eternal player and maximum survivability. Apparently, Shiro had seen this from the beginning. The hero wanted to know about divine protection and Shiro realized that the guy had noticed it too. She didn't know how to say it more properly. The thing was, there was also a god in this world. But in the hero's previous world, they had the concept of a guardian spirit. Basically, it was the same thing. The god that people love gives them a special setting called divine protection. In this world, there is a god called Tova. Therefore, Kuro had divine protection ever since he was reborn. This information just shocked the guy. He had gained the effect of maximum survivability. Apparently, there were strong thoughts in his divine defense. His younger sister was probably praying for her elder brother to continue living. Thinking about her, the guy had tears coming to his eyes and his body trembled like an aspen leaf. It was as if he could feel his little sister's angel giving him the power of eternity and protecting him. Shiro wanted to warn the boy that conquering the labyrinth was very difficult. Even with his divine protection, he could still die there. But despite that, she was sure that the guy would still continue his journey into the dungeon. Kuro thought of the person who is eternally connected to this life and protects it. For that reason, he wanted to use his newfound life for his sister. The boy decided that he would definitely find his sister in this world. Thus, a new path opens up for the person who has completed everything. Darutora was a country that was located in the center of the continent of Arculia. With a beautiful environment, it had many lush and green pastures and farms. It had a kingdom whose prosperity was maintained by the heroes. The young man who was reborn in this world traveled to the capital of this country. In the new world, a new story began for the main character named Kuro. Kuro was curious to explore such a big city. He was constantly looking around at the chatter of people passing by. Shiro waved his hand and called out to the hero. When the girl turned around, he wasn't there anymore, so she was worried about the missing guy. The hero apologized. He just marveled and thought that he was really in a different world now. The girl understood everything and said that everything was fine. She held out her hand to him and the Kuro suggested that he should have taken her hand. It seemed to Shiro that they would be in a difficult situation if it lost sight of him again. Besides, he probably wanted to take a walk around the city. Kuro agreed with her, so he let Shiro take his hand. After a while, the guys came out of the armory where the guy picked up some new clothes. Shiro exclaimed that he looked just great now and resembled a new adventurer. The hero barely smiled and said he would like to ask her a question. He wasn't sure if such lightweight equipment would be enough to use to fight monsters in the dungeon. Shiro replied that in his case, he would be fine in this gear. Equipment was definitely an important attribute, but he was going to an entry-level dungeon. For example, considering his stats, if he was hit by a truck, the Kuro would be fine. If that was indeed true, then Kuro thought this setting was amazing. After the weapon shop, they entered the magic shop. The guy mentioned that his magic attribute was black, but he didn't realize it. Shiro agreed with him, but she didn't know how to use it either and suggested asking the shop owner. The guy seemed surprised when they were told that black magic was rare. The shopkeeper in the form of a big muscular man took the boys by the shoulders and hugged them. He was happy to see Shiro here, who apparently had finally found a boyfriend. Shiro asked the old man not to say anything stupid, because he knew the answer. The man smiled and welcomed the newcomer to his magic shop, introducing himself to the gyro. The guy hesitated to answer, then gave his name and asked the old man a question. The thing was that they were going to buy some magic equipment and Kuro asked what was different about the magic equipment sold here. The old man remarked that it was quite original and said that they had dealt with things like this. He showed the surprised Kuro an artificial magical equipment known as plates. If you put this crumb on your tongue and let it melt, you could acquire a magical skill. The old man chuckled and said that judging from the guy's face, he didn't believe it. In that case, he suggested to just try it somewhere else. Jairu along with the guys walked to the magic training arena. There, the salesman made sure that the guy swallowed all the records he bought. After that, he suggested starting with the wind attribute. The magic formula for the wind attribute just had to appear in his head. It would be engraved in the guy's head on how to start and finish thanks to all those records. Kuro realized everything and tried to focus on himself in the strong wind. Closing his eyes, he saw the notification that the suit Orthia had been received and ordered it to rage. In the same instant, wind whirlwinds formed around the guy. The raging wind whistlingly lifted the leaves up and emanated from the Kuro in circles. It looked like it was a success. Shiro was pleased and suggested he try water magic. The girl asked Kuro to aim for the leaves of the nearest tree. The boy gave the order to the Torranger and acquired the flood skill. Apparently, those plates really worked. A puddle formed around the leaves, which consumed the greenery. The old man turned to Kuro and offered to try the other plates. The hero for some reason stood silently still and the man wanted to ask him what was the matter. Meanwhile, the Kuro focused on wind and water and then used another skill. He raised his hand up and ordered the Aisha to get a freeze. He pointed his hand at a leaf, whereupon the tree leaf was restrained by a shard of ice. The man was impressed that a hero without instruction was able to combine water and wind to create ice. This guy was an impressive rookie. The hero smirked slightly, for he was beginning to understand how to use this magic. Gyro apologized to the guys, but even he didn't know much about the black attribute. But if he found out anything, he would inform them immediately. During the day, Shiro and Kuro made a ton of purchases together. Kuro apologized for the girl having to pay for all his stuff. Shiro asked not to worry about it because he could pay her back the money he would receive for defeating the monsters. However, the interest had been accumulating for 10 days. Kuro already thought that the girl was a black market money lender. Shiro suddenly opened her skill bar in a panic and exclaimed that she had completely forgotten about it. The hero didn't understand her sudden change of mood and asked what was wrong. The girl forgot that she had to buy something for someone, so they had to hurry. Shiro ran ahead and apologized to Kuro. She asked to wait for her literally for a little while and try not to get lost. Kuro asked her to wait, but despite that, Shiro quickly lost sight of her. The guy thought that if she was expected to go on a simple shopping trip, he could help her with that. While waiting for the Shiro, the Kuro leaned on the railing of the bridge and looked down, deep in thought. The hero no longer had any suspicion that this world was different from Earth. He thought about the setting of divine defense and magic that was real in the Archulea. Kuro thought about what he was trying to do and hoped that his sister was also in this world. While the guy was thinking about it, someone's voice called out to him and asked what he was doing. Kuro turned his head and saw a gorgeous long-haired lady with an expensive-looking cloak in front of him. It was the first time the girl had seen such a face and thought that the guy was a visitor who had come here yesterday. It seemed to the hero that there was something wrong with her eyes. Despite being beautiful, they were quite dark. Hero wanted to know who she was and asked the girl a question. The stranger offered to come up to her and examine her. The guy didn't understand at first, but apparently she was referring to her stats. When the guy opened her panel, he saw that she belonged to the hero class. Her current status was peak and her experience points were private. If the stats were to be believed, her name was Quinty. Apparently, this woman was a hero like Tavai Reitsu. Quinty thought the guy was pretty impressive, because his stats were nothing like the stats of the first level. Kuro suggested that heroes had to be awesome, since he had heard that heroes kept the peace in this country. Quinty agreed with them and confirmed that she was a hero. They killed demons because they were both heroes and they collected magic equipment, and they also destroyed enemies. She also noticed that the guy's magic attribute was black. Kuro thought that was strange and asked her about this attribute. The girl replied that usually attributes such as fire and water were natural attributes. She had a white color attribute, which is similar to the attribute of a hero. She suggested that the hero must have had the strongest attribute of those born on the Archulea. She had previously thought that she was the only one who was special and thought she was the only one in this world. Quinty had no doubt that the Kuro would undoubtedly be worshipped as she was. Kuro suggested that she would like to stop being a hero. This question seemed quite interesting to her. Kuro thought running away was a normal thing to do if she didn't like it. Quinty replied that he was the first to say that. The guy didn't know what situation she was in, but when she talked about her heroic work, there was bitterness in her voice. If she was forced to do something she didn't want to do, she could just run away. Even if it bothered someone, she was pretty good at it. Kuro felt that she should have ignored all the people who made her sacrifice herself and do what she wanted. It was his personal opinion, which surprised the Quinty. The girl admitted that she didn't know about what to do after running away. The guy suggested that she should start thinking about it and just run away. This response caused the woman to laugh. A genuine smile appeared on her face. She asked Kuro if it was really true. As they were talking, the guy was called by a Shiro and apologized for waiting. The hero replied that she had come just in time, for right now he was talking to the hero. But when Kuro turned back around, he didn't see anyone anymore. Shiro wanted to know what was the matter, but the guy replied that it wasn't important. After their conversation, Kuro remembered that he missed his chance to ask about Tavai Reitsu. The next day, the protagonists reached a dungeon on the outskirts of the city. There were guards constantly present around this dungeon. The guards warned that one team had already entered the dungeon before them today and asked them to be careful. Shiro told the guy that it was finally their time to enter the dungeon. She forgot to mention it, but there was no such thing as revival magic in this world. So if he died, he would die for real. The hero asked her to be careful as well. As they approached the entrance to the dungeon from below, someone's piteous screams came from the darkness. Shiro said that since today was the first time he was trying to conquer the dungeon, they wouldn't go too far. The hero agreed with her, thinking that the only key to the Tova lay in this deep pit. The guy jumped first, followed by the Shiro. Thus, the former vigilante took his first step as a dungeon conqueror. There were dungeons that were scattered all over the Archulea, which could be divided into two types according to their features. There were sanctuaries that extended to the sky. This was the territory of the gods, in which the trials of the angels await. The second type of dungeons were sinister grounds that led deep into the abyss. This was the territory of demons where monsters were born. At this moment, the hero along with Shiro arrived at the ominous fire elemental Zest ground. The young man took his first step into the nest of monsters. The first floor had the atmosphere of a real dungeon. Shiro asked the boy to be on guard, for he didn't know when a monster would appear. Shiro wondered if monsters really appeared so close to the surface. Shiro replied that that was the case and that's what raiders like them were for. The monsters created in the ominous grounds were eager to come to the surface. If left alone, they would come out and attack humans. This meant that they had to be suppressed at intervals. The land also gave rewards to those who defeated the monsters. The hero was curious about the reward. Shiro replied that since the goggles recorded visual data, they could confirm the kill. These glasses were contact lenses. It was almost as if the glasses were more useful here than in the world the hero came from. Walking a little further, Shiro warned the Kuro that one of the monsters appeared ahead of them. It was a small furry ball with an eye and looked quite harmless. The little creature noticed the adventurers and stopped. Kuro thought it was strange that it was a monster, but Shiro asked him to keep his guard up. The little harmless ball turned into a toothy black creature that suddenly pounced on the hero. Without any hesitation, the guy grabbed his sword and killed the monster. The hero realized what they really looked like. Shiro exclaimed that the next one was approaching them and the guy prepared to attack. Two strange creatures appeared behind him that looked like masked ghosts and could hover in the air. These monsters were called Kekkers. Their pillars of fire fired from whatever they touched. In response, Kuro used ice and had it freeze their enemies. In an instant, the two monsters were bound by blocks of ice. The hero wanted to know the opinion of the Shiro, and the girl admitted that he did great his first time. The hero now understood the full power of the settings. It was completely different from when he was in his world. Shiro replied that the hero was especially extraordinary, and that was even more important. The girl exclaimed that this wasn't the end. At that moment, someone's clawed paw stepped on the frozen monsters and the blocks shattered into small shards. Right at the guys were a horde of monsters that were armed with weapons, just like humans. The hero noticed that there were a lot of them, and the girl offered to do their best. Shiro pulled out a couple knives from her belt and threw them at the monsters' heads. She smirked and replied that there were a lot of them today. She noticed Kuro walk right up to them and warned that it was dangerous out there. Meanwhile, Kuro continued to walk forward without question. He asked his sword to turn into a blade that would destroy the evil gods and become stronger than the fortress. Shiro realized that the guy was using enchantment magic. The blade became sharper and its strength increased as well. The hero couldn't say he hated those monsters, but he had to see his sister sliced in half by a whole horde of enemies. The guy thought that he couldn't die here until he saw her. Shiro exclaimed that it was just unbelievable. She assumed that Kuro had been a soldier in his past life. The boy suggested that he was probably more like a bandit. As Kuro thought, he wasn't too familiar with either sword or magic. Despite that, he did better than he expected. He was surprised to see something new in his stats. Shiro congratulated the guy for managing to level up to level 2. Kuro became aware of how this world worked and learned a lot. After a while, they climbed up to the 4th floor together with Shiro. They had gone pretty far his first time, and it was more than enough. Shiro suggested they stop, but the guy wanted to go further. Shiro crouched on the rocks and replied that she had led many people before, but not as energetic as him. She was sure he could keep it up. The hero looked at the girl strangely, and the Shiro thought there was something wrong with him. At some point, Kuro picked her up in his arms and wanted to make sure she was alright. Shiro blushed, not realizing what was going on here. Kuro apologized for thinking only of himself. He forgot to think about her stamina and suggested going back for the day. The embarrassed girl reminded him that he was holding her in his arms, but she could walk on her own. The guy noticed that her face was terribly red and assumed she had a fever. Shiro exclaimed that she was fine and asked him to let her go as soon as possible. No sooner had the hero put Shiro on her feet than they heard strange noises and raised their heads to the ceiling. Kuro thought that Shiro also heard something come from below. The girl turned to the guy and asked him to come back before her. Before entering, the guards had already told them that there was another group that had entered here today before them. That only meant that they were fighting somewhere down there. Shiro didn't know that, but it was likely that they were bound to meet them soon. To Shiro's surprise, the hero grabbed her arm and stopped her. The hero replied that he may have been acting selfishly, but he couldn't let her be in danger. Kuro had previously told her that he was not a decent person in his previous world, nor was he going to become a good person in this new world. However, there was one thing he had already decided. The guy was going to do what he thought was right, and for that reason he couldn't let her go alone. The guy wanted to know what their guide was going to do and assumed that they would go together or go back. Shiro didn't want the hero to die, so she asked him to follow her instructions. The hero promised her, after which they went on their way. The girl asked to follow her and be careful. She realized that from now on, whatever happened next would no longer be a secret. The boys eventually made it as far as the 6th floor. They assumed that the sound was coming from right there. Shiro thought that if they were killing monsters for a bounty, there would be enough monsters on the top floor. That meant that this group had come here for another purpose. The girl stopped abruptly when she saw someone's body a couple steps away from them. It was the black and charred corpse of a person. Shiro became uneasy as it was clearly visible that this person had been burned alive. In addition, it was not the body of a simple person, but a child. Shiro didn't understand what a small child could be doing here. The hero noticed someone's large silhouette in the darkness and looked closely. It was a huge monster with the body of a lion. The demon had already noticed the kids and was going to deal with them as well as the others. Shiro recognized the Kurazen Memiyasu and told the hero that it was very bad. It was a scary monster that wielded a magic tool. So Kuro faced a sudden fight with a scary dungeon boss. The young man felt again what Arculia felt. This world differed in its principles from his familiar land. The hero no longer saw any fault in it, looking at the creature. It was certainly a completely different universe. Unexpectedly, he and Shiro encountered a terrifying threat during his first dungeon raid. On top of that, this monster possessed a magical tool. What surprised the hero the most was that the terrified surviving children were fighting him. He could only curse them and ask them to hold out a little longer. But not far from the children, Kuro saw a certain adult holding a magic staff. He smirked and exclaimed that his magic would be ready soon. The guy ordered the children to die so he could have a few more minutes. Shiro didn't understand what this guy was going to do from such a long distance. Shiro replied that it was probably a nobleman and his slaves. There was a slave system in Arculia. Slaves had to obey their master's orders completely. They were the property of wealthy people such as nobles. The nobleman brought his slaves with him to the dungeon to raid for a special reason. He was going to use his slaves as a tool to defeat this monster. Then he would get a magical tool and raise his reputation. Even if the order cost them their lives, the slaves still had no choice but to obey. A frightened little boy came at the monster with his sword, but the hero asked him to stop. As soon as the monster only raised its huge clawed paw, the wounded boy flew aside and his sword broke into pieces. The girl, that was also a slave, was horrified as her little partner fell right in front of her eyes and bled to death. From the intense fright, the girl closed her eyes, but the nobleman didn't realize what she was doing. Insulting her slave, the nobleman ordered her to use magic, because it would attract the monster's attention. The guy yelled that their lives meant nothing and even 1 second was enough to save him time. The nobleman ordered the little girl to die and she had to go into the monster's clutches. The little girl continued to cry, keeping her eyes closed and preparing for her terrible fate. Meanwhile, the Kuro could not stand it and used his blade, which turned to eradicate the evil gods. With his powerful attack, he cut off the monster's paw and saved the little girl from being killed. The monster screamed in pain and meanwhile the guy carried the slave girl to Shiro. Shiro smiled and said that everything went well. They had discussed earlier that they should have gotten out of here, especially since there was no point in staying here for long. Hiro was in complete agreement with her. Looking at the girl's frightened eyes, the hero wanted to make sure she was alright. At the same time, he noticed an attack coming towards them. Shiro grabbed the girl and jumped up, dodging the enemy's fire. Hiro followed their example and dodged the raging flames. Shiro and the girl landed on a large rock where the fire couldn't reach. She was worried about Kuro, but the boy replied that he was fine. Judging from the enemy's sudden attack, the hero assumed that they had angered him. If they couldn't avoid him, they had only one choice left. The hero without question took his sword in his hand and went at the enemy. He said that they had no choice but to defeat him. The guy used water bullets and freeze in the form of ice shards in his jump. But after the Kuro attack, he realized that the magic had no effect on him at all. In that case, the guy decided that he would have to slaughter it as he had done before. But then the hero noticed another oddity. The monster's arm that he chopped off started to regenerate until it fully recovered. Just like Shiro said, this creature was special. While Kuro was pondering his next actions, he was called out by a nobleman while calling the guy an insolent brat. The nobleman was right in front of the Kuro's nose. The nobleman thought that the hero was trying to take away his gains by appearing here so suddenly. The insolent man looked into Kuro's eyes, which reflected nothing but hatred and contempt. The nobleman assumed that the Kuro was mocking him and warned him that he was the eldest son. Before he could finish speaking, something that looked like a plant sprouted from the monster's back. This bud opened and shot out many sharp tips, which pierced into the nobleman's body. The boy screamed in pain and fell to the side, and Kuro dodged the ensuing shrapnel. As he dodged the attacks, Kuro studied the enemy and thought that apparently he had no open spots. He always reacted to what he saw. In that case, the hero was going to use a different tactic. Pushing himself off the ground, he made several high jumps. Once behind the enemy, the Kuro wanted to target its neck from the blind spot. While the monster couldn't see him, the hero had already prepared to strike. But what Kuro did not expect was that at the very last moment, the monster would turn towards him and hit him with the same huge tail that had been firing projectiles earlier. The Kuro smashed through the wall with a thunderous crash into the rocks. Shiro called out to the Kuro in horror. At that moment, the young man felt it again. He felt the principles of the parallel world and the overwhelming force that didn't care about reincarnation. The monster slowly loomed over the boy while the hero sat on the ground and moved away from the impact. Being somewhere in prostration, the hero did not understand where he was and what he was doing. When he opened his eyes, he suddenly saw his sister standing with her back to him. Hiro was surprised to see her and asked what she was doing here. When his sister turned to him, he saw tears in her eyes. The boy didn't understand why his sister was crying. Omitting this moment, the hero remembered that he forgot to tell her something. But as soon as he said it, his sister started to get farther away. Hiro extended his hand towards her and asked her to wait, but the Tova disappeared. The guy who was thrown back by the monster was bleeding and reached forward, saying his sister's name. Hiro was in a desperate situation after receiving a blow from the magic tool wielder. Upon waking up, Hiro thought that it was a pretty terrible dream. Even with the adjustment, things didn't go according to plan. Just like Shiro said, it was the power of the magic tool wielder. Right before his eyes, the monster grabbed the nobleman and ate him alive. After eating the man, the monster started screaming even more. Hiro could only curse it. He knew that the creature also wanted to devour him. The hero apologized, but he wasn't going to die as he still had things to do here. Even if he couldn't move, or even if he used up all his mana, he would definitely do it and deal with it. While the monster was approaching the hero, someone threw a knife at his eye. The monster threw its head back in pain and wailed. The girl was relieved and ran up to Hiro and said that it was pretty close. The hero was surprised to see a Shiro here, who came up just in time. Hiro didn't understand why she was helping him, but the Shiro asked her not to move and used a healing glow. She directed her magic to Hiro's wounds and began to heal him. Everything around him began to glow with her light magic. Shiro said she could only give him first aid. She managed to hide the little girl on the top floor, and they would escape as soon as the hero could move. She was surprised when Hiro asked her to hurry up and get out of here. He was sure he deserved it for his selfishness, but she didn't need to stay here with him. Shiro exclaimed that she would behave selfishly in such a case. The guy exclaimed that as a guide she had already done enough for him. He assured her that he would be fine, so she could just leave. But Shiro had previously told him that it would be a waste. She had already seen several visitors who had the same eyes as his, but they were all living normal and happy lives now. Arcalia was a place that changed people for the better. It was a world where everyone could be reborn anew. For this reason, she could not leave him here. Shiro's body began to tremble and the guy stared at the girl in surprise. He was shocked that she was crying. Shiro thought that he should have been happy too. The hero noticed a monster approaching behind her back and asked her to be more careful. The monster threw the girl back with its clawed paw, and blood spurted from Shiro's thigh. Hiro called out to the Shiro, frightened for her. Shiro clenched her teeth in pain and fell to the ground, unable to get to her feet. Thanks to her, the hero could move a little, but he didn't realize what he could do in such a situation. He didn't even have his sword with him. The guy wasn't sure if he could grab the Shiro and escape. He was standing right in front of the monster who was looking the guy in the eyes. At an extremely inconvenient moment, the hero received a message. The guy looked at the panel and noticed that the message was from a Juru. Hiro remembered that it was the same man from the magic equipment store. He opened the message and read it. Jairu thought he was a little late, but he found a description of the black attribute in a book related to mythical times. The black attribute combined everything and transformed it into power for the user. Jairu apologized to the guy. He searched and questioned everyone, but this passage was all he could find. Still, the man believed that the Kuro had a long life ahead of him, so he could be calm. He also asked him to remember to stop by his store. Hiro smirked and thought that the people in this world were just something. The hero decided that as soon as they returned, he would stop by the Jairu store and then ask the Shiro about what to do with the little girl. He also remembered that he had to pay her back the money he had lent her. The guy found the whole situation rather strange, because so far he had only tried to die. But now he had a lot of things to do, so he couldn't afford it. The monster reached out its huge paw towards the guy, but an unknown force reflected its hand. A black hole formed under the Kuro, from which black flames emanated and prevented the monster from approaching. The hero exclaimed that he had to kill the creature first. Shiro came to her senses and looked at the guy. It was the first time she saw his new skill and wanted to know what it was. Hiro needed to understand what his color attribute meant. Besides using artificial magic equipment, there was another way to acquire magic. It required understanding its attribute and creating magic. However, color attributes required a deeper understanding. The user determined how that color was expressed. It was the user who chose how to form that color. The hero now knew the shape and color of his attribute and could test it in action. Hero possessed the skill of Annex. It is a power that can gather darkness and then control it. It was an ability granted by the gods to the young man. An understanding of magic was required to use this technique. The protagonist gave a rather sincere answer. He needed a form that would allow him to accomplish this task. The guy concentrated his power and used the unification of darkness. Using the black attribute, the hero was able to create a dark armor for himself. After that, his dark power skill was activated and a couple more skills were added to his magic. A black outgoing aura was also under his feet. Shiro was surprised that he had a black colored attribute. Apparently, the Kuro had chosen that appearance on his own, but it looked terribly sinister. Meanwhile, the hero thought that Shiro was safe, and now he could deal with this monster without worrying about her. The guy looked at the monster that rushed to attack and thought that it was the annex. He needed to come up with some kind of plan to kill this monster. The hero had something for this formidable beast. With these thoughts, the guy used the black burial skill. In an instant, the huge monster's entire body was pierced by black sharp pillars. The monster howled in pain as the prongs pierced its entire body. The annexation of the Memiyasu was confirmed. The hero's magic energy recovery was activated, as well as the other 3 skills he had acquired in the battle. Shiro couldn't believe her eyes, for the guy had no healing magic, but somehow his wounds were healing. The guy thought that his attack wasn't enough to kill the beast, so he had another plan in mind. The hero transformed the sword that appeared in his hands with the black attribute. Shiro stared at the guy in surprise, unable to believe that he was able to transform darkness into a sword. The enraged monster launched its flames at the hero, but the Kuro remained motionless. The boy was engulfed by the fire, but it was as if he couldn't feel it. Kuro realized that the annex was absorbing everything, including this magical fire. When the fire didn't work, the monster decided to use its tail and released many needles into the hero. In the hero's current state, he had everything under control, so he could easily avoid each needle and approach the tail. Hiro cut the tail into small pieces and exclaimed that he would kill this monster. Now he could use darkness unification to create dark armor and use black burial to attack the enemy. With this, he could cut down anything that got in his way. With these thoughts, the guy swung his sword and used the Dark Devourer skill. A huge black wave crashed straight at the monster. The power of the black wave was so devastating that it cut the monster's entire body in half. Devoured by the black flames, the monster fell dead to the ground and Kuro assumed that it was over. The guy wondered about the power of the annex. It was a darkness that absorbed part of the monster's body and apparently increased the hero's power. Kuro noticed in the system that the annex's absorption of the magic tool was confirmed. The system gave him a choice whether it was worth proceeding with the conversion and acquisition by decomposition. After doing so, the Kuro obtained the magic tool. It looked like it was just a ring, and the hero hoped that he could meet the heroes by having it with him. The girl called out to the hero and the Kuro hoped that the Shiro was okay. Seeing the little shabby girl, the hero remembered that they still had other problems to deal with. He hoped they were okay and asked them a question. The girl walked up to the boy and hesitated to answer. Gathering her strength into a fist, she asked the hero to make her his slave. She exclaimed that she could clean toilets and take care of livestock and even cook a little, and she could use various magic. She went to the last one and mentioned that she was a girl after all, so she could do other things. She begged for the Kuro to take her in and was willing to do anything. With this request, the girl bowed low to the Kuro. Unable to bear the strain, she fell on the Shiro's lap. The girl suggested that she was quite tired and was at her limit. Kuro asked the Shiro what they would do with her. Since the owner had died, the ownership would most likely go to the relatives. Kuro wondered if there was any way to cancel or postpone it, but that depended on what they said. Most likely there was nothing they could do about it. Shiro wanted to know what the hero wanted to do with this child if they used the money they received. The hero decided that they would do what they could since they were up to their necks in this case. Shiro grinned and apparently began to guess what kind of person he was. In any case, they should have gone back first. The hero felt that he should have thought about the girl after they got home. With those words, he took her on his back and they proceeded to the exit. The young boy had already committed suicide once before, but the sun of this world shone directly into his eyes, and the wind of this world fluttered his hair. In his second life, Kuro pursued his own goals. Several days had passed since the protagonists had returned from the dungeon. It had already snowed outside and covered the building of the northern evil grounds called Rest. In that very dungeon, the elimination was complete. This time it took the group a long time to clear it out. The group talked about the rumors that had happened in the sinister ground near the capital. Some newcomer who had just arrived in this world had defeated a magic tool wielder. The girl that defeated the monster hoped it was a girl who had a promising future. She hated guys because they were all animals. Her partner knew she would say something like that. The girl who had this opinion about guys was named Tova. She may have been the sister that Kuro was looking for. A guy who killed himself after avenging his little sister woke up in another world known as Arcalia. This world was like a fairy tale and comparable to fantasy, a world with swords and magic. Moreover, this world was constantly in fear of monsters that came to the surface and invaded it. Even with such problems, the young man probably preferred this world to his former world. The hero sat quietly by the girl's bedside and watched her sniffle in her sleep. The reason he preferred this world was because he was able to save at least one person in this world. Sitting in the bar and watching the adventurers drinking, Kuro didn't realize if it was normal to spend money on such activities. Shiro smiled and said that the pub was grateful to him and they were also quite generous. The hero said that a simple thank you would be enough for them. He didn't understand why people needed to spend so much money. Suddenly, some mustachioed large man clapped Kuro on the shoulder and asked about a drink. Kuro was disgusted that he smelled so strongly of alcohol. He told the Jiru that they had survived because of his message. Jiru laughed and reminded him that it was all nonsense. The man was sure that because of his status, he didn't need Shiro's help. Kuro replied that she had always helped him. Really, he hadn't done anything to repay her for her help. The guys didn't understand what was going on between them. Suddenly, the hero decided to shock everyone by taking the girl in his arms and said that she looked pretty tired. One of the adventurers cried and said that apparently their Shiro was already tainted. Unable to bear such an insult, the Shiro slapped the Kuro in the face and asked how he could do such a thing in front of everyone. Shiro tried to justify himself and asked him to understand him properly, for Kuro was a very sincere person. The adventurers laughed at the fact that the dancer was getting angry, but Shiro asked them to stop. Looking at them from the side, a feeling of nostalgia visited the guy. He remembered that he was once like that when the Tova was still alive. A woman came up behind Kuro and grinned, saying that Shiro was quite popular. The woman suggested that Shiro was lonely because she couldn't commit to one person. She smiled and introduced herself by the name Winnie. The woman assumed that Kuro was her friend. Kuro introduced himself by his name and said that he currently lived on the second floor of the inn. Winnie replied that she knew him because he was already a celebrity here. She had heard a lot about Kuro from Shiro. The ceremony of offering the magical instrument was to be held in a week. The hero was thinking of taking a walk and seeing the sights until then. It made sense since Kuro would only be here for a few days. Winnie smiled and told him not to be shy to ask her anything. The hero surprised her with an interesting question. Kuro wanted to know what Shiro was really like. Winnie assumed he was interested in her, but that wasn't the case at all. He just wanted to know some details about her. For example, why she was a tour guide. She had been helping him since he was in this world. He just thought he had to repay her in kind, not just with money. Winnie suggested asking her more directly or spending more time with the broad. The woman thought the guy had plenty of time for that, and the hero agreed with her. As they were talking, Shiro called out to Kuro and asked him to come over just for a second. It was worth mentioning the devil and he was already here. The guy said they would see each other later and left the Winnie. As they stepped aside, the hero asked the girl a question. He thought she should have gone back to work, but Shiro grinned in response. She had something to show him first and asked Akona-chan to come out to them. Kuro was surprised to see the same girl they had rescued in the dungeon here. She looked completely different now and was wearing a clean dress. Remembering her dirty, frightened face, the boy said that she looked completely different now. Earlier, they had managed to beg the head of the noble family to transfer ownership of the girl. It was as if the dead nobleman who had taken the slaves to raid the Zesta had done all this of his own free will. He first told his father that he was just going to the dungeon, so he approved it. After they got the girl, the guy wanted to know what she was called. The girl answered that she was number 38. Kuro didn't mean that at all. He clarified and asked what her parents called her. The girl was confused and fearfully replied that her name was Akona. The hero asked Shiro about the conversation about hiring Akona at the pub. Shiro replied that she had asked about it and it looked like they could do it. They were understaffed right now. Akona didn't know what they were talking about and fearfully asked about it. The hero shocked the girl when he said he had no intention of making her a slave. Instead, he would want to get behind her friend, but she still didn't understand him. The guy explained that he arrived in this world a few days ago, so he didn't think he would be a good guardian for her. After seeing her working for one of the worst people, he thought she could help out at the pub. Kuro said that from then on they were friends. The girl hung her head and trembled. She introduced herself as a resident of Jiboruna, the enemy country of Darutora, and her parents had been killed right before her eyes. Akona cried bitterly because she didn't know what to do anymore. Hiro and Shiro calmed the girl down and said they would think about it together. The hero wanted to know if she could really work here, and Akona gave a positive answer. She wanted to try her best as the people here were quite nice. Akona was sincerely grateful for his help and inadvertently called him master. The hero replied that he was her friend from now on, so she could just call him by his first name. The girl smiled sincerely and agreed, while calling the guy by his first name. Shiro called out to her for help and the girl hurried over. Just as Shiro had said, there were as many slaves as there were stars in the sky, and they couldn't save them all. Nevertheless, Kuro wanted to do what he could. Suddenly, the doors of the pub opened loudly and all the customers turned back sharply. In front of them stood a tall and muscular adventurer that could barely stay on his feet. There were many wounds on his body, and the man himself was breathing heavily. Kuro looked at the adventurer questioningly, having never seen him here before. But the local adventurers assumed the taiga in front of them. Unable to bear it, the man fell to the floor and the people shouted that it was Wow Taiga. They rushed to his aid and asked for help in lifting him up. Shiro quickly brought a towel and held it out to the injured taiga. The hero assumed that Shiro knew him. The girl replied that Taiga was a ranger and also a regular visitor. It seems that earlier he and 5 companions had set out to challenge the keeper, but had wound up alone. This could only mean one thing. This was the first time the hero had heard of keepers. The girl replied that it was the owner of a magical instrument in the deepest part of the sinister land. Usually the country ordered and sent heroes to go down there and destroy them. The owner of the magic tool was like a Kurizen Memiyasu they were fighting. The memories of the horrible creature they met in the dungeon floated in front of the guy's eyes. Taiga replied to the rest of the adventurers that they were fools. No one would have thought that they would have challenged the guardian. The creature started at them and gave them a creepy smile. It licked its lips as if it had just found its victim. It had overwhelming power, though it could have killed them at the same time. Instead of a quick death, he played with them. The guardian of the Grin Sagirusu they met in the dungeon turned out to be a brutal killer. One of the adventurers did not understand why only he had gotten out and asked about what had happened to his companions. A shiver ran through Taiga, whereupon he said that the man had left him alive. After he finished playing with his comrades, he killed Mio, Cruzo, and Hana right in front of him. Then, when Taiga glimpsed the Kuraru, the monster grinned widely. The monster took it in one hand and disappeared into the darkness. Taiga asked someone to use healing magic on him. He was going to go back there again and enter the dungeon. The adventurers shouted that it was too dangerous because he wanted to face the Sagirusu again. They believed that even if they healed his wounds, his magical powers would not be restored so immediately. Moreover, everyone believed that the Kurara was most likely already dead. But even if that was the case, Taiga had no intention of giving up. He had to return even if his chances were slim. Taiga would like to take the body of the Kurara and the rest of his comrades. While saying all these things to the others, the man coughed out blood heavily. Despite this, he believed that even if it cost him his life, he would meet the Sagirasu face to face. The man was surprised when a single man approached him and called out Taiga. He declared to him that he would go with him. This person turned out to be a Kuro who certainly wanted to enter the dungeon of the Grin. Everyone, including the Shiro, was excited by this sudden decision of the Kuro. The next morning, Taiga mentioned what he had said yesterday. He told the boy that he had never seen him here before. Taiga was grateful to Kuro for agreeing to go with him and wanted to see his confidence. The guy asked him not to worry about him, because when they were done, he could repay him with a mug of beer. Shiro apparently went along with them and motioned for them to move out. The 3-man team was assembled and set off for the ominous Grin site. The girl was glad that she had been prudent enough to bring a spare. She gave the coat to Kuro, which was made of magic-resistant material. The coat was great for reducing magic damage. The hero thanked her, but still he wasn't worried about himself. He wasn't sure if the Shiro really needed to go along with them. The girl replied that she had her own reasons for going there. She remembered all those guys that Taiga had gone with and said that she knew them. She had guided them through the Arcalia in her time just as she had guided Kuro. For that reason, she wanted to go. She didn't know how this would end, but she couldn't just sit here and turn a blind eye. The hero was curious about the way the Shiro thought. No sooner had they left than they heard someone's small, quick footsteps behind them asking them to stop. It was an Akona who had asked to be taken along. She was sure she would be useful to them as she could use various magical skills. The hero asked the others to move on until he could talk to the Akona. The hero warned the girl that where they were going now was much more dangerous than the previous dungeon they had gone to. He couldn't afford to take her with him because it was very dangerous. He hoped she understood that. Akona hung her head frustratedly and said that they had always helped her, but she could never repay them. In place of the obvious answer, the hero asked her if she liked fish. The girl didn't understand what he was talking about, and the guy replied that in the world where he came from, he often ate fish. They grilled it or boiled it. He had heard that the people in the Garutora didn't eat much fish. That's why Kuro thought that she had to help add fish to the pub menu and he would like to see it. The girl replied that she could certainly do it and make delicious fish dishes. Kuro agreed with her and said that he couldn't wait to try them already. She asked Kuro to be careful and said goodbye to him until we meet again soon. The boy smiled and then left following the others. Ikona felt that she couldn't help them. The hero thought it made sense considering how she had lived so far as a slave. Kuro would be just happy if she could get used to her new life. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by the same familiar voice that suggested that the guy was going to another dungeon. The hero was surprised to see Quinn here. Quinn silently jumped down from a large tree branch and got to his feet. Kuro apologized, but he had to go. In response, Quinn wanted to know the reason why he was going to the dungeon. She had heard that he had gone to the Zest to get a magic tool, and she could understand that. But she didn't understand why he would go to the Grin. In her opinion, he wouldn't be able to extract anything from there except fear and pain. She assumed that Kuro wanted to be a hero. For a while the boy pondered her words. Kuro clenched his hand into a fist and said that he wasn't really interested in becoming a hero. In that case, Quinn didn't understand the reason. She thought that he and his comrades got what they deserved. Those weaklings were stupid enough to defy the guards. She would understand if it was someone like a Kuro who came face to face with a magic tool bearer. Quinn thought it was too late to save this girl. But even if she was right, Kuro wanted to try. The hero believed that it was all the right thing to do. But that was clearly not a good enough reason for the girl, and in that case he had one more. Kuro smirked and said that once this was all over, that comrade would buy him a beer. Giving up free beer is a big enough loss. The hero asked the Quinn's opinion and the girl understood. During the conversation, a Shiro clicked him. The girl waved her hand at the guy and told him that if he didn't hurry up, they would leave him. The guy wanted to answer Quinn and turned in her direction. Before Kuro knew it, Quinn was gone. Kuro didn't find it surprising that she suddenly disappeared as usual. Quinn wanted to ask the guy to be careful, because his magical colored attribute is not an invincible weapon. If used incorrectly, it would devour its user. After a while, the group of protagonists reached the dungeon of Grin. Before entering, Kuro wanted to know where they could find the Sagurus. The man replied that he was in the deepest part on the 13th floor. Going downstairs, he wanted to make sure once again that the hero was sure of his decision. But Kuro replied that they had already discussed it and looked around. The guy wanted to ask the others to hurry up, as suddenly his words were cut short halfway through. He questioned the man and asked about the strange plants that grew on all sides. Apparently, that was why the dungeon was named Grin. Taiga asked to drop the logic known to the surface guy because this dungeon ignores it. That went without saying, but everything was possible here. Moreover, there were mid-level monsters here. This meant that the monsters that dwelled here were much stronger than the ones they encountered. During the skirmish with the monster, Shiro used Odin's Valkyr and ordered it to shatter their enemies. Shiro asked for permission to begin by saying that she was not their enemy. She had guided countless people over the years. No sooner had she finished speaking than a huge, terrifying centipede with fangs came out of the ground. The girl screamed that there was a bug here and fled. Bugs were the one thing she couldn't deal with in this world. Taiga got ready to fight and ran at the monsters with shouts. In one fell swoop, he chopped down several monsters at once. Taiga exclaimed that they didn't have time to deal with this minnow. He knew the way and asked the others to follow him as fast as possible. The man didn't understand why the Kuro was standing still and not attacking the enemies that were about to catch up with the guy. The hero only ordered his black attribute to absorb everything around him. He transformed his attribute into black spikes and ordered it to pierce the monsters' bodies. In the end, most of them were destroyed. Taiga said that the black attribute was slightly different from the one mentioned in the heroic tale. Kuro didn't understand what he was talking about and asked him a question. Taiga replied that there is a book called The Heroic Tale about the Great War between humans and demons. This tale was based on historical facts. It detailed the actions of a group of heroes who fought the evil god. There is a very popular character in the book called the Black Hero. The hero asked the girl if she knew about this book. Shiro exclaimed that she certainly knew about it, because it was a widely known fact. She just didn't think it was worth mentioning since the image of black was portrayed by the author's imagination. Kuro was curious about the person the black character was portrayed as. Taiga replied that he was a just and righteous man who fights demons to protect people. It could be said that he was a young man who firmly believed in justice. Kuro thought that he was apparently a pretty awesome person. He was completely different from Kuro because he just did what he wanted to do. It seemed strange to Taiga that Kuro just laughed. Before the man could say anything, the Kuro went on following the Shiro. Taiga heard something else about this story. The book said that the white hero was losing his memory. Meanwhile, the black hero was losing himself. Kuro didn't realize yet that his mental defilement had increased to 0.1000th of a unit. Heroes of the Great Demon War, widely supported by the inhabitants of Daruder. This story was a creation drawn from the sacred writings of the Aquaray. There are many differences between the two, but what was particularly striking was the deaths of the heroes, especially in the story of the heroes, where she frantically portrayed the magnificent end of the two heroes. In this story, the two heroes sacrificed their lives in order to defeat the evil god. There was a mysterious dark hero and another man. The most interesting thing is that the black hero's last moments were not described in the scriptures. In the middle of the battle, when the monsters pounced on Kuro, Taiga asked the guy to be more careful. But Kuro was completely calm and used black burial. Many black spikes sprouted through the ground and destroyed the monsters nearby. But, despite the efforts of the Parchero, the monsters still kept coming at them. In that case, the guy had another plan. He transformed the black attribute into two blades and used the Black Devourer skill. In a leap, he chopped down many monsters in one fell swoop, which dissolved into thin air. At that moment, his mental defilement reached to 0.05. Taiga heaved a sigh of relief and said that the next floor would be the last floor. It seemed to Shiro that the Kuro had also mastered his magic quite well. The guy looked at his stats and noticed something interesting. His mental defilement had increased, but the hero didn't realize what was wrong with that status. Shiro pointed to the guy's wounded arm and asked for permission to heal it. Shiro replied that it wasn't that important, but Shiro just wanted to help him. By helping him, Shiro wanted to thank him. She thought it would have been hard for her and Taiga to get here on their own. The girl smiled and suggested that they all go back together with Kura and the others. After the healing, the hero noticed that his mental defilement had lessened. It was surprising, but he didn't have to worry about it right now. After a while, they finally caught up with the deep section of the 13th floor. A huge scary gate opened in front of the group, inviting them to enter the pitch darkness. Almost nothing could be seen in this room, but Taiga was sure that Sagirusu was somewhere in here. The man was absolutely sure of it. Suddenly, Shiro's eyes rounded. Not far from them, she noticed a Kurara that was sitting on her knees in front of them. The group hoped she was okay and rushed to her aid. Taiga apologized for leaving without her and hoped she was uninjured. But what he saw made him break off half-heartedly. It was as if the girl had gone mad. Even though tears were flowing from her eyes, she was laughing as if possessed. Taiga didn't understand what had happened to the courier. The demonic voice greeted the guests and said that they had traveled quite a long way to get here. Finally, they had arrived, for he was rather bored. The creature lit all the torches in the room and said that he almost died of boredom. Thanks to the torches, the whole room was lit up with a warm fire. The room resembled a circular arena. Kuro was surprised at how much the atmosphere had changed here. The monster that appeared from the darkness welcomed the boys into his palace of joy and pleasure. Sagirusu Dumiorarudo, ruler of the deep forest and stealer of other people's souls, came out to meet them. This creature consisted of a terrible skeleton, which seemed to have sprouted from the roots of the trees. It seemed incredible to Kuro that this monster could speak like a human. This monster was completely different from the previous magic tool guardian. Taiga was consumed with anger, and he wanted to find out from the creep what he had done to his guys. The man lost his temper and threw himself into a frontal attack. He wasn't going to wait and asked about what the monster had done with the courier. Kuro called out to the Taiga, but the man didn't listen to him at all. No sooner had Taiga gotten close to his enemy than woody, withered hands sprouted through the ground and grabbed his legs. The skull monster smirked as he remembered the same man who was here yesterday. He was insanely grateful to the Taiga for bringing his friends here. That was why he had let him go yesterday. Sagirusu laughed as Taiga raised his weapon and tried to get rid of his hands. His huge axe struck the roots and shattered the ground beneath his feet into pieces. Taiga wanted to warn the boys to be careful, but when he looked back, the Kuro and Shiro were gone. While he was looking back, a human tree figure had formed not far from him. The tree man's face took on the appearance of a guy named Kirusu that was on a team with Taiga. The adventurer was horrified when she saw this, but Shiro asked Taiga not to stand still. She barely opened her mouth as the enemy's powerful attack flew towards her. The girl jumped aside. It turned out to be another tree man who took on the countenance of a girl named Hana. Sagirusu laughed out loud and asked the guys about their creations. He thought it was quite artistic. He planted his sapling inside a human corpse, and all that was left was to leave it overnight as his puppet was ready. Yet it was as if the last woman understood everything. Tears flowed from her eyes and her lips tried to call out her partner's name. Sugirusu hoped that these people understood the beauty of his creations. Taiga desperately asked the guys to stop. After all, they were friends. Shiro asked that Taiga not forget what purpose they had come here for. No sooner had she said that the guys were dead than one of the tree monsters came up to her from behind. In one fell swoop it wounded the girl and Shiro fell to the ground. Before Shiro could even get to her feet, the two creatures had already pounced on her. The girl screamed in fright, and before her eyes she saw a lot of blood. It was Akiro that grabbed the girl under her arms and destroyed the tree monsters with its black spikes. The tree creatures that took the form of Kirusu and Hana began to disappear. Guy asked Taiga not to worry, for he had absorbed their remains through the blackness and they would be able to take care of the burial after the battle. Now the Taiga needed to attend to what he had come for. Hiro reminded him that he had come here to save the Kurara. Now the crying girl was sitting right beside the feet of the fearsome Sukirusu. Sukirusu exclaimed that he would not allow this to happen and attacked Kuro with many vines. Right in the jump, the hero used black unification, after which he dipped into black armor and picked up a dark sword. Sukirasu found it interesting that the guy could use black magic. Hiro thought he was a real scoundrel. That horrible picture of his poor sister's cold corpse loomed before his eyes. Whether human or monster, anyone who played with people's lives should be punished. Hiro exclaimed that he would kill such a one without any pity. At that moment, the guy's mental defilement had caught up to 0.15 of a unit. The Demon Land is a place that is filled with evil energy where monsters are created. There were different types with different affinities. They were ruled by those who received the favor of the evil god known as the Guardian. Guardians were different from ordinary monsters that only sought to escape to the surface. The creature that drove away any enemies, and the one who lives in the deepest part underground, is known as a guardian. Also, the Sugirasu that the group of heroes fought were also known as the Keeper. In a leap, the guy dodged many vines and chopped them with his black matter in an instant. Sugirasu was surprised by the hero's unusual strength and wanted to know what he was. The monster didn't think that anyone would be able to use the black attribute. In addition, it was a simple man who was showing his arrogance. Sugirasu directed the three tree monsters at Kuro in anger. Taiga recognized the Mio and warned the guy about it, but Kuro remained undeterred. The hero used the black burial technique on the enemies without pity and destroyed the attackers with sharp black spikes in one fell swoop. After his attack, the mental defilement reached 0.20 of a unit. After massacring several subordinates to Sugirusu, Kuro thought about how to defeat the main man. But at that moment, the guys shouted to Kuro that it was enough. They were able to find Kururu and the others were already dead. Shiro exclaimed that they wouldn't be able to defeat the Guardian. It was too dangerous, so they should have gotten out of here. They were only saved by Kuro, and instead of fighting the Keeper, they should have taken Kururu to the doctor. The guy ignored her warnings and ordered Taiga to pick up the two and return. All of this was far from out of their request, but of his own volition. Kuro was covered in black smog and exclaimed that he would kill the creature. Shiro was frightened at how cruel and scary Kuro now looked. The guy went to attack, but Taiga and Shiro asked him to stop. In a split second, the guy was right in front of the enemy's face and swung his black sword to strike. Sukirusu laughed and exclaimed that this was great, because he liked Kuro's face. It was much better now. The monster thought it was beautiful when anger took over someone and changed them. And yet the monster thought it wasn't enough. With these thoughts, he stabbed the vines into Kuro's stomach and the guy spit out blood. The monster exclaimed that there was no elegance in his fighting style, and he looked like a beast. Sukirusu toppled the wounded guy to the ground and said that someone like him wouldn't be able to overpower him. The guys got scared when their comrade fell to the ground and called out to Kuro. Kuro was furious and didn't realize what he was doing. He tried to calm down and not let his anger overwhelm his body. Kuro realized that emotions alone would not accomplish anything and he had to focus only on his goal. For a moment, he thought he was holding the very knife he used to kill those people in the other world. He had to seal his heart and just keep thinking. Kuro tried to go through that pain and bitterness again. It was necessary to go through it just like the time he took revenge on those people. Kuro tried to remember who he really was and remember how he was supposed to kill his enemies in reality. Kuro got up from the ground and went at the enemy. His gaze now reflected only hatred and determination to kill. At some point he stopped, bleeding, and Sukirusu laughed loudly. He thought that was the limit of the guy's strength and assumed that the Kuro would at least try to fight. Sukirusu wanted that since he was bored to death here. With those words, he once again attacked the guy with many tree vines, but the hero used the fire baptism skill. A strong flame engulfed the tree roots and swept over Sukirusu's body. The monster was impressed by such monstrous flames. He thought that this was the power of the black unification. Trying to burn it was quite a clever idea, but this level of power was beyond him. But after a while, Sukirusu became nervous when a black attribute suddenly enveloped him and wrapped around his body like a rope. Sukirusu was restrained in his movements but didn't realize what it was. The guy smirked at the fact that his enemy didn't know about it and replied that it was the power of a rotting guardian. Sukirusu exclaimed that it was his ability. Apparently, the hero had recreated it with his black attribute. Seeing the black sword in Kuro's hands, Sukirusu asked him to stop and suggested that he calm down and talk. Kuro replied that he was perfectly calm and said goodbye to Sukirusu. After saying that, the hero used a black devourer, then swung his sword. A black wave came crashing down directly on Sukirusu. The shackled monster appeared to be shattered into small pieces from a single sword strike. When their enemy was destroyed, the Kuro's mental defilement reached 0.512 thousandths. The group exclaimed that they had been able to do it, and that the Kuro had single-handedly defeated the Sugirusa. But to their surprise, Kuro turned to them and exclaimed that it was not yet over. The boy walked over to the barely surviving skull of the monster and looked at it with hatred. He recalled that Sugirus was bored to death, so now he could die quickly. Sugirusu admitted that the man had frightened him, so he could admit defeat. However, their enemy could do something else. Suddenly, many roots sprouted from under the ground and began to surround the Taiga from the Shiro. The guys were shocked that this creature still had strength. Hiro realized that it was his handiwork and Sugirusu grinned. He said that before he died, the evil god would inflict something terrible on his enemies. Shiro raised her head in horror and looked up. Right from the ceiling, a raging flame was slowly descending down on them, destroying everything in its path and covering the entire area of the room. In the end, the survivors were safe and the keeper was defeated. It seemed that our heroes had defeated the villain, but it was not so. Taiga, Shiro, and Kuro looked up in horror from where something terrible was descending on them. It was an evil flame that was descending straight down into the dungeon. It seemed to Kuro that it surely could have been the sun. The Sukirusu skull laughed and confirmed the boy's guess. The monster said that the plants needed the sun in order to grow. There were also many monsters that grew here and later rose to the surface. Apart from him, this sun, in a way, is the source of life and the core of this dungeon. Sukirusu exclaimed that new guardians would grow on the very place where he rotted. This sun that shone for him could also be used to burn his enemies. The monster asked to rejoice, for they would be destroyed by the life-nourishing fire. At his command, they would all turn into jumbled pieces. Shiro suggested that the boy just run away from here. They couldn't stay here, and every second mattered to them. Shiro looked around and looked at the doors. She exclaimed that they didn't open and that Sukirusu probably wouldn't let them escape so easily. The monster laughed and said that she had put it perfectly right. He tried to clear things up and said that even if they killed him, they would no longer be safe. The countdown was about to begin and their fate would be sealed. Sukirusu ordered them to die with him in that place, but Kuro replied that if he so desired, he could die here alone. The hero took a fighting stance and said that they would in their case live. His strength was running low, but the Kuro didn't see it as a big deal. He had absorbed Sukirusu's magical energy for such a situation, and if anything, he could use it. The hero threw his Dark Devourer skill and pointed it towards the blazing sun. Shiro and Taiga were shocked at how his attack was quickly absorbed by the sun. It was pretty obvious that such an attack wouldn't be able to absorb an entire sun. It was worth it just to look at its size. Even if it could be absorbed, it would take too long. In that case, Kuro decided to resort to the second plan. He used the same skill simultaneously a few more times and exclaimed that he wasn't allowed to stop even for a moment. Each time, his dark attacks beat against the flames of the sun and extinguished. Shiro suggested that he destroy the door and escape to the surface, but Kuro exclaimed that it was useless. They would rather burn than be able to do that. The boy cursed and began to consider his actions in a hurry. He thought about his other attributes besides black. He could extinguish it with water or he could cover them with earth. Instead of trying to extinguish the sun, he could use the dark cover to protect them. As he continued to strike in vain, Kuro decided that this was not the case. In order to remedy this situation, he had to do something about that sun. Each time with a new attack, his dark defilement reached higher and higher. Eventually, when the value reached more than 1, a mental contamination came over him and the Kuro came to an abrupt halt. Shiro was scared for the hero when he just stopped in place. She wanted to know what was wrong with him, but Kuro was silent for some reason. Suddenly, the guy found himself somewhere in the middle of nowhere. He couldn't understand what kind of place it was. A second ago he had seen something about mental contamination and thought that was it. Not far away from him he saw some kind of flame. The black flame was as if it was alive and looking directly at Kuro. Someone behind him ordered the boy not to take another step and called Kuro by name. Kuro looked back and saw his sister Toa. The girl replied that he should never have discovered this power, and if he did, he would no longer be himself. It was a mighty and terrible power. Toa made sure the boy understood this and asked him to come back. She held out a shining Kuro hand and looked at him. The shocked Kuro thought that it was not a Tova at all, but just an illusion projected in his mind. Kuro began to think about the consequences if he touched this dark creature. The black flame creature looked at the guy like that, but still he was willing to do it if it would solve the current predicament. In that case, it didn't matter how risky it was. He was willing to go to this length to meet the real Tova again. With these thoughts, the hero stretched out his hand toward the black flame. Hero decided that he would definitely do it, and his body began to be covered in black flames. From then on, the magic skill, Dark Fleeing Night, was added to him. Around the hero began to form a black vortex that seemed to absorb everything in the area. Shiro covered her face with the palm of her hand from the terrible wind, and Taiga tried to understand what was happening to Kuro. Now the hero understood everything and said that from now on this is his new power. Kuro raised his head with a mad look and pointed his hand upwards towards the sun. He used the new skill of Dark Fleeing Night. After activating it, many black flaming spears rained down on the sun, which flew straight out from the black vortex of darkness. There were so many of them that they actually began to consume the sun. Sukirusu exclaimed that this was simply impossible, and it couldn't be happening. Besides, the human body could not produce so much magic and use such divine power. Taiga didn't listen to the skull and shattered it to pieces with his axe. The man said that now it was over and remembered all his fallen comrades. Taiga admitted that he was worried for a moment. He saw Shiro approaching the guy to make sure he was alright. Shiro didn't understand what was going on with Kuro and why there were so many black flames coming from him. It was as if the guy didn't hear anyone and stood still. His mental contamination had already reached 3 units. She thought about Kuro and the fact that she had warned him. She thought of Kuro and the fact that she had warned him. The colored attributes were not a miraculous solution, and if used incorrectly, things could end badly. It would definitely lead the one using the attribute to death. After defeating Sugirusu's last attack, Kuro's mental state became unstable. Shiro and Taiga were trying to figure out what problem they were facing this time. Shiro exclaimed that the sun had disappeared and Sugirusu had fallen, so it was all over. The girl continued to call out to Kuro, who could barely hear her voice. The guy looked back to see where the voice was coming from, but instead of his comrades, he only saw their vague silhouettes and couldn't tell if it was an enemy or an ally. The hero decided he had no allies and attacked the Shiro. Taiga was scared for the girl and asked her to be careful. At the very last moment, he managed to push the Shiro away from the dark flames, but his axe hit the fire. Taiga was shocked that his axe was consumed and said that if they weren't careful, they would suffer the same fate. Shiro couldn't believe that something like this could happen to Kuro. Taiga turned pale and guiltily replied that it was his fault. As he read the manuscripts in the holy book, one passage caught his eye. A white saint will lose his memory, but a black saint will lose himself. Shiro didn't understand what he meant. Taiga admitted that he didn't fully understand it himself at the time, but he knew that the black man was dangerous. Despite that, he decided to keep silent about it. Taiga apologized for not telling Kuro about it in time. If Kuro lost himself, they couldn't be sure that he would listen to them. Taiga looked surprised at the Shiro, who decided to boldly go ahead and deal with the situation. Taiga thought that it was too dangerous. After all, this was no longer the Kuro they knew. But the girl was confident that everything would be fine. Kuro was just a little lost in himself, and that's why she felt she had to go. Shiro was going to be sure to do so since she accompanied Kuro in this world. Taiga said that he remembered something else from the manuscript. In order to come to his senses, he needed to be reminded of something very dear to him. If it was her, it was possible that she could bring back the Kuro. Taiga apologized to her and hoped the Shiro would return it. The girl smiled back. She continued her journey through the dark streams of Kuro and asked him to hold on. Shiro was shocked by his so intense magic, but she had to move carefully and not touch it. She knew that if it hurt her, Kuro would blame herself for it. Before she could think about it, clots of flame wrapped around her arm. Shiro thought it was strange that her magic couldn't absorb those flames. Just as she thought, Kuro was still conscious, and he could still understand her. Shiro sneaked through the dark currents of his attribute and saw the Kuro. The girl was horrified to see Kuro in such a state. The guy sat silently on his knees and looked down as if there was emptiness. Shiro knelt down as well and hoped he understood her. She gently reached out to the hero and asked him a question. Shiro touched his shoulder and asked if the guy could realize himself. At the same time, the guy's body was engulfed by the very black flame he touched. Somewhere in his consciousness, his sister told his brother that he would not be able to use that power. It ended up working out just as she said it would. Even though she had to work hard to look like Tova, she wanted to stop him, but apparently it backfired. She did it because she knew he wouldn't die until he found Tova. However, if he got stuck here, he probably wouldn't be able to search for her any further. Hiro's inner voice in the guise of a Toa raised its head and said that she was already here. If it was her, then perhaps Kiro could listen to her. The hero heard the voice telling him that it was already over. The guy vaguely remembered the Taiga and the Clara that the voice was talking about. The voice exclaimed that all he had to do was go back, but the hero did not understand where to go back to since he had nothing. Shiro exclaimed that if he didn't hurry up, Akona's cooking would get cold. Hearing that name, a familiar image of the girl suddenly appeared in the guy's mind. In addition, he had come to this world to find his sister Tova. His dark consciousness had finally cracked. Hiro began to remember that he came to this world looking for someone. The creature inside the boy that took on the appearance of his sister Tova smiled. It said that Shiro was desperate to reach him and he wondered who she was to Kiro. The crack was starting to get bigger when Shiro said that his second chance had just begun. The hero finally began to remember that voice and this person he had come all this way with. Shiro didn't know where he was stuck, but she was determined to definitely bring him back. Shiro remembered that this girl was annoying, intelligent, and kind-hearted. If she needed to, she would say it as many times as necessary. After her words, the crack began to break into shards, and a bright light illuminated the darkness. Shiro exclaimed that Kiro could be happy too. After those words, his dark consciousness shattered into small pieces and the guy came to his senses. He looked at the girl in surprise and said that he remembered her name. Standing right in front of him was none other than Shiro. Taiga began to notice the black mist dissipating and assumed that the Shiro had done it all. The adventurer hoped they were all right, but he couldn't see where the Kiro had gone. When the dark clots of flame dissipated, Taiga saw Shiro hugging the boy with a smile. Hiro smirked and called the girl a round fool. Shiro smiled warmly and replied that he was exactly the same. Now they could return home where a girl named Ikona was waiting for them. There was a grand seafood banquet waiting for them, so they should have hurried to their home in this world. After the group returned from the dungeon, a guest came to the resort. The boy went down to meet him. 2 weeks after clearing the dungeon, Green, our hero, who has already defeated 2 villains, decided to rest. He took a short respite for himself. Hiro was surprised to see Taiga as a guest. They finally had peace and could enjoy a drink with their friend. Taiga was happy that they were served seafood today, because it was very rare. The guy replied that it was very tasty and Ikona cooked fish every day at his request. Hiro inquired about the condition of the Kirara. Taiga replied that he had taken her to a magic healer, a doctor using magic as treatment. No matter how long it took, he would support her until she fully recovered, for after all, she was his comrade. They were also able to give their comrades a proper burial. Taiga asked for permission to thank Kiro again for his help. Taiga asked the guy about his mental contamination and Kiro asked not to worry about it. So far it had been kept at a low level of only 1/100th of a unit. As long as he didn't abuse the black, he would be fine. However, he was thinking of consulting one of those doctors, magical healers or whatever they were called. The hero had to not let this happen again, for the Shiro would not be able to save him all the time. Taiga smirked and said that the scriptures said something else. The Black Saint would need both loved ones and comrades to fight side by side. He wondered what category the Shiro belonged to, but Kiro could not answer his question. The guy suggested that they put that aside and decide what they would do with the item. Taiga stared at the small crystal in surprise. Kiro replied that it was a magical tool worn by the Sugirusu. He had already taken what he needed from Zest and didn't really want to wear it. In that case, they could sell it and spend the money on Clara's treatment. Taiga was grateful for the offer, but this belonged to Kiro. He also had his pride as a dungeon cleaner. Kiro was without a doubt the one who defeated Sugirusa. However, Taiga himself had to fulfill his duty to his fallen comrades and Clara. After all, he needed Kiro's help to take revenge, so that was more than enough. Kiro understood his point of view and agreed with his decision. Taiga replied that it was time for him to go and said that Kiro had helped him a lot. In parting, Kiro replied that this was not the end. The guy smirked and suggested they have a drink together sometime. After all, as he said, they were comrades who fight side by side. Taiga smiled and happily agreed with him. He asked to be allowed to treat Kiro next time. The boy felt relieved. It was as if Taiga was also able to move forward. Kiro thought that Taiga was an incredible guy, and he was able to look forward even after such a loss. With his help, Clara would surely be okay. Shiro smiled and agreed with the hero. She almost forgot to show Kuro something and asked to look at it. The hero looked at the black box and asked what was in it. The girl replied that it was ceremonial clothes. They had a little more time, but Shiro suggested they try to put it on now. Shiro was thrilled when she saw the outfit on the boy and exclaimed that it looked very good on him. Ikono was in total agreement with her and exclaimed that he looked incredible. It made the hero feel like he was in some fantasy. Nevertheless, the clothes looked quite expensive. Shiro had asked to keep in mind that this time there would be a red hero at the ceremony, and that was something he had fought for so long. The hero had been busy clearing dungeons and collecting magic tools all this time. All this was in order to use them as offerings at the ceremony where he would be able to meet the red hero named Tova Iretsu. All of this was for the sake of today. Today was the day of the ceremony, which was held at the Darutora Palace on the Memorial Hill. The guy went inside the palace where many people had already gathered. Everyone was luxuriously dressed to match such a beautiful hall. The hero thought it was amazing, even though he had heard about it. He hadn't expected the ceremony to be so grand. Someone approached the hero and assumed he was the hero. The hero turned around and saw a girl in front of him. She introduced herself as Purasu Ganzu, which was a lieutenant. She had already heard stories of how Kuro had helped them. It was the highest honor for her to have the opportunity to meet the famous black hero. The boy didn't understand why she called him that. Purasu thought it was a rather fitting epithet for Kuro. Kai thought it was a nickname for a hero who was mentioned in some sacred scriptures and stories. The girl replied that he didn't have to worry about that, as he was the first to wield black in 1,000 years. No one would be able to deny it. In particular, if he meets the royal family, obtains citizenship and a relic, he will technically become a hero. The hero replied that he wasn't interested. Purasu was shocked and couldn't believe her ears, because he could refuse such a thing, even with his incredible strength. She corrected her glasses and said that there were people who also made that choice. If he became a hero, even though it could not be inherited, he would receive privileges equal to aristocrats. In addition to the substantial payments, many restrictions on ordinary people who visited the country are removed and life becomes easier. However, even though they are technically civilians, they are considered part of the country's armed forces. If ordered, they would have to risk their lives fighting on the front lines. Kuro realized that if they had privileges, there must be responsibilities on the flip side. The girl pointed to the side and told Kuro that the other heroes were over there. Not far from them stood a blue hero named Rukus. It was said that he was unrivaled in the field of ice magic. Combined with his good looks and status as an aristocrat, he was a gentleman who received enthusiastic support from the public. There was also a divine healing heroine named Irufi nearby. Aside from her battle prowess, her magical healing skills were unmatched by anyone. No matter how serious the wound or illness was, she could heal it. Although looking at her, one could tell that she had some minor character flaws. The tipsy woman approached the cute girls and offered to play with her for a while. Kuro said that heroes were definitely unique individuals, but still the true potential of a hero lay on the battlefield, not with social affairs. Purasu said that there are 7 other heroes besides Kuro. Even among them there is a great hero who earned fame single-handedly by destroying many magic tool holders. It was a true one-man army. Darutora was called a nation of heroes. Although there are many descendants of heroes, the bloodlines have thinned. As expected, those who helped achieve victory in battle were the current heroes. Earlier, Quinn had told the hero that only he and she had colored attributes, but the blue hero apparently had a colored attribute as well. Kuro felt like he had missed something when he thought about it. Before he could think of the other heroes, the hall was notified of the arrival of the red hero. Kuro turned his head and noticed a familiar silhouette that made him freeze in place. The red hero turned out to be none other than his real sister named Tova. The blue hero told Tova that she was a little late, but the girl replied that she had business with an annoying dungeon boss. The healing hero called Tova over to his place and offered her a drink. Tova calmly offered the Irufi to do it without her. She preferred sweets over alcohol. Kuro still couldn't believe his eyes. He noticed that his sister had gotten a little taller and her hair had grown back. Her face began to look more grown up, however there was no mistake here. This face was without a doubt hers. The boy decided to call out to his sister and hesitantly called her name. His voice made the girl stop abruptly. Tova looked back at her brother, but seeing his face she silently walked forward. Kuro bowed to the king, who said that from that moment he became a citizen of Darutora. He would now be known as Kiruno Ranserato. Today, after the hero designation ceremony, our young hero became one officially in this nation. However, his mind was far from clear. The moment he met his sister, he realized that it was definitely her. It was the Tova he had been looking for so long, but the girl asked who he was. The girl replied that she was definitely a Tova, but felt that he could not address her without honorifics. She therefore asked to be called by her full name. Tova frowned and asked if they had met before. She was displeased that the guy was not even able to introduce himself properly. The shocked brother didn't understand what she was talking about and reminded her that he was the very same Kusuk. Her words hurt like a knife when the girl mentioned that she didn't know any Kusuk. The guy was completely confused and didn't understand what was going on. There was no doubt that the Toa was standing in front of him, but for some reason she didn't recognize him. Toa told Rukius that her mood had worsened and asked him to bring her some juice. The young guy grinned and said that if it would make her feel better, he would honor her request. Hiro still couldn't believe it and asked the girl to stop. The Rufi that stood behind their backs smirked and said that she was starting to understand. She never would have thought that he would turn out to be the Kutayan. Hiro was shocked that she knew then and asked her a question. Irufi was a divine healing heroine after all, and her other title was magical healer. As such, she specialized in mind tuning, but the hero didn't understand what she meant. She had a kind of magic that allowed her to calm a mind troubled by anything from everyday stress to memories of a spectacular death. Especially those that had experienced a violent death, she had them as quite frequent patients. Tova had also experienced a similar death. Hiro was horrified when he realized that Toa had become one of her patients. The woman smiled and said that she was not supposed to reveal information about her patients. The Tova had first arrived here 5 years ago. After she was brought here, she was in a terrible panic state. She screamed constantly as if she was afraid of something and cried all day long. Between her sobs, they heard the same name. It was her brother's name. Despite this, she persisted in her treatment. After she calmed down one day, she said something to Irufi. She wanted to forget her past and asked her to do it to her. Human magic couldn't erase memories, or to be more precise, magic that erases memories doesn't exist. So Irufi put a lock on her. She put a lock on her mind that sealed a certain memory, but she couldn't say it was perfect. After all, someone of her level could break it. Besides, if she came into contact with something that had to do with those sealed memories, the lock could open on its own. Right now, Tova's condition was stable. She wasn't having nightmares, and she wasn't crying alone. That was how she must have been originally. Hiro thought that it was all his fault. He thought that that very day, if he had stayed with Tawa and not gone with his friends, things might have been different. In that case, she wouldn't have died and suffered so much that she wanted to forget her past life. She wouldn't have had to fight like a hero in her new life. Hiro had only himself to blame and thought that if he wasn't her brother and if it wasn't for his mistake, this wouldn't have happened. Hiro was in pain seeing his sister and thinking about her condition. His own thoughts made his heart ache. Suddenly, the boy came to his senses when he heard the chattering of strangers. It seemed to the blue hero that the black man was not feeling well. Hirasu offered Kiro to bring him some food, but the guy refused. He kept thinking about the fact that his sister was in front of him and did not know what to do. Tova sealed her memories at will because she didn't want to remember her past life in that world. The Rufi said that the castle wasn't perfect and the guy allowed that he could make her get her memories back. Hirasu approached Kiro and said that it was quite unexpected. Kiro did not understand what Hirasu was talking about and asked her a question. The girl answered that Kiro had the strength of a hero. He had previously talked about how he was not interested in becoming a hero. But even if that was true, he used the power to save the young slave girl, and in addition, he cleaned up the dungeon that had been taken over by that guardian. Despite his lack of interest in the power, he had used it to do those deeds and used it well. The guy assumed it was true, but he didn't understand why it was unexpected. Hirasu replied that Kiro did not hesitate to use his power to help them. But in this situation he was hesitating for some reason. Of course, simply having this power did not mean that one could solve all problems. However, if he had the power, he would be able to fight in the name of protecting the innocent. Hirasu couldn't believe that he, who didn't want fame or wealth, valued something above all that. Hiro thanked her for those words, but Hirasu asked not to be thanked. It was she who was grateful to him for Kiro deigning to speak to her. The guy thought to himself that she turned out to be right and he had nothing to worry about. And it was all because the Tova felt good here. Kiro blocked his sister's path and addressed the lady by her full name. He apologized for his recent rudeness, but the Toa replied that it was fine. In her eyes he looked like he had been thinking about it for a long time, so it was okay. Tova was not the type to hold a grudge against anyone. The guy thanked her and thought about the fact that she really never held a grudge against him. Toa thought of his name and assumed it was Japanese. Toa's real name was Kiruno Toa. In return, she wanted to know Kiro's name. Kiro introduced himself as Kiro Kusuk. Toa noticed that they differed in one syllable only and asked how old he was and when his birthday was. The boy replied that he was 18 years old and his birthday was October 10th. The girl exclaimed that this was quite an incredible coincidence, as they had the same birth dates. Tova grinned and said that they looked an awful lot like twins. She herself didn't notice how much those words hurt Kuro. Kuro couldn't take his eyes off her movements, her speech, and her smile. The guy was happy and thought that was enough for him. He smiled and extended his hand to his sister. No sooner had the Tova shaken his hand than sounds of a scandal were heard nearby and distracted them. One of the heroes was terribly angry with the young lad. Earlier, the hero had asked him to put carom in his drink, but he did not. The young waiter apologized and said he was sorry. The man didn't understand how heroes could be treated like that and gritted his teeth in anger. Hiro didn't know that the guy was a hero, and the Toa replied that his name was Red Dawn Reiku. She asked not to mess with him, for he was far from being like Kuro. No sooner had she said this than this fellow came up to Kuro and put his hands on his shoulders. He recognized the very black hero everyone was talking about. He was filled with pride that he had been reborn in this country. Kuro hesitantly greeted him. Reiku thought it was interesting that the red hero was also here. He smirked and assumed they were gossiping about him, but Toa replied that he was wrong. Toa believed that she hadn't told the Kuro anything untrue about him. The boy grinned and asked Kuro about the forest, which he was probably in for the first time. If he had been there, he must have known a young lady named Shiro who had white hair. The boy replied that Shiro was his guide. Reiku exclaimed that it was a coincidence, for the mother of the Shiro was his guide. Both mother and daughter worked diligently at the inn, and it was delightful. Reiku feared that he had become so engrossed in his heroic duties that they had become strangers to each other. Hiro was surprised to hear this information, for Shiro had never spoken of this before. Reiku smirked and said that there was nothing strange about it. After all, he was the one who killed her mother. Hiro stared at the guy in shock, not believing his ears. Hiro had just learned that a hero named Reiku had killed Shiro's mother. He wanted to make sure it was really true and asked the guy a question. Reiku figured he should have rephrased better. If he wasn't mistaken, it happened 7 years ago. Just like Kuro, after being reborn, he went to his first dungeon. As the hero already knew, he was considered a one-man army. As such, he didn't need a guide to clear the dungeon. However, this woman kept up with him. It was a kind woman named Kuka who was the mother of Shiro. He had been told earlier that she and her daughter had been reborn together as Akuria. After the road accident, she worked in this tavern and was a guide for the reborn people. In any case, she was an annoying woman. She always acted like a senpai and was a burden. After walking a few floors, she said she'd had enough for today. Reika had quite a few long-awaited dungeons waiting for him, but here she spoiled all his fun. So he had a brilliant plan on how to get rid of her. Reiku used her as bait for the keeper of the magic tool. She was a useful bait to study his habits. After he got the magic tool and returned to the tavern, it was her daughter's turn. Shiro made a noise and asked for her mother back, but the Reiku punched the girl in the face with his fists. Reiku thought he had only poked her lightly, and then the bullies in the tavern gave him a hard time. In truth, they were just fools, even though they didn't stand a chance against him. Nevertheless, it was because of this woman that he became a hero. He recalled the Shiro and wanted to ask how she was doing. His sentence was cut off halfway through when he saw the Kuro seeming to sizzle him with her gaze. Reiku replied that his face was quite ugly and he believed he had hurt Kuro's feelings. Hirasu asked Kuro to calm down as well as Reiku. She felt that his joke had gone too far. They were celebrating the birth of a new hero and they had to behave appropriately. Reiku ordered her to keep quiet and keep her nose out of other people's business. The hero asked to answer only one question. He wanted to clarify if he had really injured Shiro. Reiku grinned and asked him not to exaggerate so much. Still, the ugly figure as she lay there with a bleeding nose was very amusing in Reiku's opinion. Hiro replied that he understood. If the Reiku wanted to fight so badly, Kuro was gladly willing to help him do so. Apparently, they convinced the guests that this was an exhibition match. It seems that the Reiku Dana was in trouble. Toa thought he was a real idiot and the culprit of the whole situation. This provocation looked just disgusting, which was not the case with his abilities. This time he would face a new black hero. The Ice Hero told Tova that he and she added colors to their titles in accordance with the nation's mandates, but they had no colored attributes. But like Q and Ishidano, who possessed white, Kuro also possessed a true color attribute. This power decided a lot of things and perhaps this battle wouldn't be that easy. It seemed to Reiku that there was something wrong with the Kuro, as it clearly wasn't going to attack him. In that case, Reiku asked to be allowed to make a move first. He used an attack magic called the Light of Dawn. 3 bright orbs appeared in front of him, from which flashes of light that resembled lightning bolts popped out. Reiku knew very well that his light absorbed everything in its path, but Kuro could say exactly the same about his black attribute. The boy used Dark Devourer magic to stop Reiku's attack. His black spears blocked the light's path. Reiku was quite amused to see what the black actually looked like, but he said it wasn't enough, after which he made a huge hole in the floor. Hiro crouched on the floor as he dodged the falling floor at the last moment. Reiku considered it a true hero's strength. Hiro barely looked up as he saw Reiku's smug face in front of him. Reiku was about to attack with his sword, but Kuro blocked his blow with his blade. Irufi cheered for Kuro and offered to punch him in the face. Toa remained calm and asked for the same from Irufi. Reiku exclaimed that Kuro's level only reached 9th while he had a 56th level. Just based on that, it could be said that Kuro had already lost to him. Reiku pushed the hero away that he fell on the floor and exclaimed that he would not defeat him today. It was natural that he was stronger due to the difference in levels, but battles were not decided by them alone. It became clear to Kuro. Undoubtedly, this guy was stronger than him, and yet the Reiku had missed something. Reiku looked back as he felt the heat on his back. It appeared that his clothes were burning, but Reiku didn't realize how that was possible. As he tried to extinguish his clothes, wood vines sprouted from the floor and bound his body. Reiku had absolutely no idea why all this was happening. Kuro couldn't call him a real hero, since the guy probably didn't use his head. Kuro couldn't say for sure which hand hit the Shiro. The guy decided to start with the left, and in an instant he cut off the Shiro's arm. Reiku screamed in pain and fell to his knees, clutching his shoulder with the wound. Meanwhile, his severed arm began to be consumed by black flames. The ice hero realized what it was like to fight a black wielder. He possessed a power that ate literally everything. Irufi meanwhile smirked and thought that it wasn't just black. Hiro used all kinds of magic at a high level. This was the truest black hero. Hiro looked around and thought that he had overdone it since there was a whole crowd gathered here. The guy told the Reiku that their battle was over and suggested they go to the healer as soon as possible. But the Reiku was not going to give up and raised his hand up and began to gather his light magic into a huge ball. The other heroes decided that this was overkill. Reiku was probably going to use Dawn's Farewell. It was strategic magic that could burn down an entire city. The guys shouted that Lord Kurupa Ramitsu had lost his mind. Reiku cackled and said he would kill the hero. Reiku believed that Kuro should have repented and gone to hell for his sin of daring to mock him. Just as they were fighting, another guest approached the palace. The mysterious girl stopped at the entrance and thought it was a bit noisy. Reiku used the strategic level magic of parting light. It was a technique that could burn down an entire city. Hiro pondered his next actions. He knew that if he used what he used in the dungeon, he would be able to absorb it. But Kuro feared that if he used that power again, he might lose his temper. Reiku ordered the guy to die and directed his attack at his opponent. Kuro realized that he had no time to think and was about to use his black attribute. At that moment, their fight was interrupted by someone's voice who replied that it was quite fun here. It was as if they were busy doing business here. Right on top of the building stood a short girl with 2 ponytails. The girl with curly hair offered to let her participate in the fun. Everyone looked sharply at the girl with ponytails and became quiet. The heroes recognized Parufi Findy. They were surprised to see her here, for she was supposed to be on a mission. Kuro didn't know who it was, and the girl asked if he was really black. Before the hero knew it, the girl was right behind him. Hiro was impressed with her speed, for in an instant she had reduced the distance to a minimum. He assumed that she was undoubtedly a hero as well. Harufi extended her hand to the guy and said that she decided to come here after hearing about a black hero appearing here. Still, she thought that his face looked terribly ordinary, but if he was funnier on the inside, that was still a good thing. The hero had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. Someone behind them called out to Lady Parufi and ordered her to stop with the jokes. Reiku was going to kill him, and if she didn't want to die with him, she had to use her commendable speed and get the hell out of here. The girl frowned and said that he was quite noisy. Reiku suddenly felt some kind of force that lightning ran right at his shoulder. Reiku looked at his arm, not realizing what was happening. The girl smirked and said that next time she would target his neck. The building that was behind Reiku's back started to fall. An entire hall began to collapse along with it, but no one could explain what was happening. The girl smirked and assumed that the black hero must have realized what the magic was. It was a wind blade, and an invisible one at that. However, it was not worth looking down on. It was all thanks to the supreme attribute of cutting. This blade could cut through anything. Parufi assumed that it was a strategic level magic, and if the Reiku used it she would die. But as it was, her blade would prove to be faster. The girl smirked and asked the Reiku if he really thought he stood a chance against her speed. Harufi turned out to be a true slashing hero. Reiku exclaimed that he was simply going to hold the black hero accountable. As a hero, he was a national treasure and the Kuro stole his hand. As soon as Reiku said this, he noticed that his wounded hand began to glow. After a few moments, his limb grew back. It was a Quinn that appeared as if out of nowhere. The woman made it as if his wound had never existed. Reiku guessed that she had used her white rejection magic. Kuro was surprised that Reiku was able to dispel her magic on top of everything else. Reiku was extremely displeased with this and asked to remember it. He had no intention of staying here and ordered a carriage to be prepared for him, then headed for the exit. Quinn didn't think he would just leave it like that and approached Kuro. Kuro was surprised that the woman decided to come here too. Quinn replied that Kuro ended up being a hero too. Kuro didn't even smile even though he could have said the same thing. But what was most important was that she had saved him. Kuro was grateful for her help. As soon as Harufi noticed Quinn, she ran up to her with a hug. The girl didn't understand why Quinn didn't warn her in advance that she was coming here. Just one word from her and she would have rushed here faster than the wind. Kuro didn't understand why this girl's character had changed so drastically. It was as if Quinn was her close friend, although one couldn't tell from Quinn's face. While he was thinking about it, Harufi came over to Kuro and clutched the guy in her chest. She thought he did a good job. The girl had long wanted to put that scumbag Reiku in his place. Tova gave an unhappy look at Harufi and said that she would strangle him. Hearing their entire conversation, Tova realized that he was angry about the girl named Shiro. Although fighting was not a civilized approach, Tova realized that Shiro had a tender side. Apparently she liked it, for a blush and a barely visible smile appeared on her face. Harufi suggested that Tova get drunk until dawn, but Tova reminded her that she hated alcohol. The ice hero noticed that the two were getting along better than usual, and assumed it was all due to Kuro. However, the Reiku thing was still a work in progress. For his part, the ice hero would also keep an eye on his activities. In any case, all the heroes that were here wanted to greet the black hero in Daruder. Thus ended our hero's long day. The next day, after finishing all the formalities, he went home. Though he had accomplished his original task, he had new problems. The first problem concerned his sister Toba. Even though he had teamed up with her, she chose to seal her own memories. He did not understand how he was supposed to face her. He could act not like her brother, but like a simple guy. Another problem concerned his duties as a hero. Continuing to be a hero after reuniting with his sister, he would have to go into battle if the nation ordered him to. And finally, he had one more problem. He returned to the place where it all started. It was a ruined building with arches, in the middle of which lay a statue of a broken angel. Shiro was surprised that the hero was already back and asked why he was here. Earlier, Winnie had told him that Shiro had gone here. Shiro wanted to know why she kept coming here. This was the place where reborn people appear. As a guide, she had to come here every day to check for arrivals. In any case, she was willing to listen to Kuro. The guy replied that he had heard something about a hero named Reiku, and what he had in his past related to her mother. Shiro didn't even get upset and assumed he was at the ceremony. She wasn't trying to hide it from Kuro, she just didn't consider it something that could be talked about freely. More important to Shiro was knowing that the hero was okay. She assumed they had fought, but Kuro had a question for her. Kuro realized that they had both lost their loved ones and asked if the girl had thought about killing the Reiku. He wondered if she had any desire for revenge against the man. A boy who lost his sister met a girl who lost her mother. Kuro wanted to know if she was thinking of revenge. Shiro clarified his question and said that the man had caused her mother's death. Kuro was in total agreement with her, but Shiro didn't understand what Kuro was going to do about it. The guy clenched his hand into a fist and said that if she asked him, he would definitely do it. It was all quite simple for Kuro. He said that if someone precious's life was taken from her, there was no other option but to take revenge on that person. Those who stay behind had the right to kill the lawless, even if the law didn't allow it and even if the victim didn't want it. Kuro didn't understand how it was possible to be inactive in this situation. He hoped that Shiro could sense the difference. The girl waved her hands and said that she couldn't do it. In the first place, it was beyond her power to defeat a hero like Reiku. But Kuro replied that it didn't make any difference. The guy replied that she could always find another way or become stronger. Only her desire was more important here. Shiro looked at the guy in silence for a while, after which her lips tightened and the girl lowered her head. Shiro sadly replied that her mother was always very kind. They died together by chance and were reborn together in this world. Since she was very small at that time, she could hardly remember anything. But she remembered some things very well. As soon as they were reborn in this world, the mother hugged her daughter tightly and clung to her. Her mother tried with all her might to save at least Shiro. To this day, Shiro remembered how she hugged her tightly. As a woman trapped in a strange parallel world, supporting herself and her child was beyond anyone's ability. Nevertheless, her mother worked hard and raised Shiro properly. In addition, her mother was willing to lend a helping hand to any poor people. No matter who it was, she was always very kind to everyone. Probably because of her kindness, she received support from so many people around her. The number of people who became closer to her increased rapidly. Because of the way she was, Shiro thought that becoming a guide was her mother's destiny. In the beginning, no one would accept such a job, but her mother said that it was a job that someone had to do. Then Shiro's eyes glistened with delight. She kept looking to her mother as an example, so she wanted to become a guide just like her. Only Reiku knew what happened that day in the dungeon. If he really used her as bait and left her for dead, she wouldn't be able to forgive him for that. Even now, she still despised him. Yet, even this scoundrel her mother had tried to save at the cost of her life. For this reason, Shiro did not think of killing him. She smiled sincerely at Kuro and said that she had completely forgotten about her revenge. Then Kuro was so amazed by her answer that he still thought about it all night long. The lad lay quietly on his bed and recalled their conversation every time. He didn't feel any intent of revenge from the Shiro. Kuro didn't understand how anyone could think that way despite the hurt and regret. In his case, he couldn't even forgive himself if he forgot those guys. However, even assuming that his regrets of losing a precious person had fallen away, he would still have gotten revenge on them. His anger would not allow him to hold back from revenge. The hero did not think he could become like Shiro. It meant that there were others like her in this world. While he was pondering, Ikona knocked on the room and hesitantly called out Kuro. She brought him his dinner and reminded him that he wanted to have it in his room today. Kuro thanked her and asked her to put the food somewhere closer. The guy thought it was strange that Ikona was acting differently today. He assumed that she wanted something from him and asked her a question. The girl gave out a quick answer and exclaimed that she didn't want anything. Kuro reminded the girl that they were friends, so she could ask him anything. Eventually, the girl couldn't stand it and asked him about the ceremony. She was terribly curious about what happened there. Kuro was rather surprised by her sudden question. The boy recalled that Toa had been like that once too. Girls at that age were very interested in castles, princesses, and the like. Now Ikona's eyes were glistening with excitement to learn more about it. Kuro was glad that the girl had gotten comfortable enough with her new life to think about such things. He wanted to start by saying that the hall there was very large, about 100 times larger than this place. Ikona was genuinely surprised and couldn't believe it. The guy continued and said that there were many carriages lined up at the entrance. Nobles in colorful and luxurious outfits, not to mention soldiers in elegant ceremonial uniforms, were coming out of them. The hall, on which soft woolen carpets were spread, was simply magnificent, and everything there literally shone. Of course, there was also a sumptuous banquet. Kuro noticed that the girl had already swallowed his bait. He should have mentioned the characters as well. Each of them had a unique personality. The white hero was Quinn, who came and went whenever she wanted. It was a real ghost of a woman and she looked quite mysterious. There was also a blue Rikusu hero. This is a gentleman and a handsome boy who turned women's heads with his mere gait. Ikona thought it was pretty cool, but she also thought that Kuro was handsome too. Kuro revealed that there was also a slashing heroine. If he remembered correctly, her name was Parufi. In any case, this girl was reckless and grumpy. She sliced the hall in half with her magic with a single swing. Ikona was shocked and couldn't believe that she could actually do that. The whole banquet and heroes thing, Ikona thought it was just amazing and made her dizzy. The guy remembered that he hadn't mentioned another interesting person. It was the Arufi drinking woman who could heal. Remembering about her, the hero later decided to pay a visit to the kingdom's capital. Upon reaching the clinic of Arufi, the heroine of divine healing, Kuro stopped. Judging from the sign, the woman was not in attendance yet. Kuro thought about neglecting the question about the black man's mental contamination and decided to ask her about it. The hero decided that he would stop by here later, and for now he could go shopping for souvenirs for Ikona. The guy turned back and saw the Tova in front of him. It was his unexpected reunion with his sister. Tova was also surprised to see Kuro here. Tova tried to call Arufi, but she didn't answer him. The girl was sure that Arufi was now sleeping loudly. Sometimes she was a bit annoying with her behavior. When she was in this state, it was useless to try to wake her up. Tova didn't even know what to do in such a situation. After the unexpected encounter, brother and sister were at the limit of their sanity. The hero didn't understand why, out of all the places, Tova had ended up here. He remembered that she had previously sealed her memories with Arufi magic. That surely meant it was still visiting Arufi to check the lock of its memories. Tova suggested that the hero needed to be examined since he wanted to get to her. The guy replied that she was approximately right. It must not have been easy for him to have a colored attribute. Tova smiled and said that the Arufi was very skillful and could examine him thoroughly. Tova recalled that the hero hadn't yet mentioned that he had been reborn here quite recently. In that case, Toa asked for permission to show him around the city. Hiro was confused by her offer, and the girl replied that she had arrived in this city before him. They both waited for the Arufi to return. In the meantime, the Tova could show him some interesting places. Hiro agreed with her and followed his sister. At first, the hero just wanted to visit the doctor, but now his younger sister with amnesia was showing him a city in a parallel world. Hiro didn't understand why he didn't refuse her and didn't even know what to talk to her about. Toa called out to Kiro and offered to show him the place for starters. There was a beautiful view of the city from here, and Toa confessed that it was her favorite spot. Kiro was impressed to see the whole city as if in the palm of his hand. He seemed to be the first to notice the tall statue here. Toa replied that it was a statue of a black hero. The legend spoke of only 7 heroes. Statues of black, white, red, blue and green, light and dark heroes. Tova thought that they made these statues out of imagination. After all, they lived a long time ago. As far as Kiro remembered, there was a descendant of the light hero at the ceremony. In addition, it turns out there is also a dark attribute. He wondered how it differed from the black one. Come to think of it, the statue of the black hero looked better than the real one. Hiro didn't understand why the Toa said that, but the girl laughed and suggested that they go further. Hiro ended up dragging himself after his little sister, who hadn't changed a bit in this world. Even if she had forgotten a lot about the past world, she was still as wild and daring as ever. Hiro still couldn't believe the very feeling he was experiencing at this moment. He felt as if he was back to the very days when they lived carefree in their world. Hiro noticed that the Toa was starting to drift away from him and asked her not to go too far away. Making his way through the crowd, the hero asked her to wait a bit and grab the girl's hand. Toa abruptly turned around and screamed. Hiro stopped and stared at his sister's hand in fear. Toa came to her senses and apologized. She hoped she hadn't hurt him and asked Kiro about it. She asked not to take it personally, she just had a little trouble with men. Oddly enough, she had much easier time with Kiro, but Tova didn't understand the reason why. She offered to go further, but Kiro stood still from shock for a while. He realized that even if her memories were lost, the events of that day still tormented her. Just as Kiro thought, the lock on her memories was not perfect. Kiro was afraid that her memories might resurface again because he had gotten to her. The guy couldn't touch her and didn't know what he should do in this situation. The Rufi later apologized and thought that apparently they had to wait a long time for her. The woman did not know whether or not she had told the Tova that she was napping at this time. In any case, she suggested that they get down to business. Kiro couldn't compare today's woman to yesterday's woman. She noticed Kiro was looking at her strangely and asked a question. The guy replied that she looked completely different today, and the Arufi asked what time she was better. Kiro could not answer her to this question. The Arufi decided to start by talking about the relatively mental contamination they talked about on the glass. To be honest, there was a lot she didn't know about colored attributes, primarily because they were very rare. Guy had already heard about the black hero losing himself and said it was written in the manuscripts. It was also written there that a white saint would lose the past. The woman asked him to tell about his feelings of mental contamination. The guy remembered that a rather strange feeling visited him at that time. He looked normal, but it was as if something was controlling his body. Arufi speculated that he might have lost himself, or he had a different personality. But it was also possible that it was completely different. Either way, she asked that his power not be abused. At worst, it was something that could usurp control of his body. The boy didn't understand what she meant. Arufi warned that something in him could be constantly trying to take control of his body. She only knew of black and white, but similar flaws were seen in other holders of colored attributes. When using colored magic and attempting to attract excessive power, the symptoms worsen. Something in the Kuro appeared after he used Dark Fleeing Night. Arufi was very sorry, but there was no cure against it. However, he could stop the degeneration of the contamination by avoiding overuse. If that were to happen, Kuro should have focused on what he held dear. She had heard that true emotions were the key to recovery, and right now he was worried about things that were precious to him. It was much more than the mental infestation. Kuro wanted to clarify if it was really normal to be here. He wanted to know if it was normal for him to be around the Tova in this case. He was afraid that if he was close to her, they had a chance that her painful memories would resurface. Arufi replied that even if one forgot the pain, there was no way to erase the trauma. The same thing was happening to her heart. There were still scars in her soul. The most she could do was to hide the existence of those scars. She had only recently forgotten about them, so the cuts could still hurt. His fears were justified. By interacting with her forgotten brother, the lock on her memories could open. However, even if it disappeared, that could not be said for her scars. They will stay with her forever. Irufi thought that the guy only had one thing to think about. He shouldn't have thought about being around her. He should have realized if he wanted to be around her. After their conversation, Kuro came out to Tova and the girl wanted to know how he was doing. Kuro replied that he was fine, but other things were more important right now. Kuro thanked her for today and asked her to let him treat her. They could also invite Rikusu or Irufi. Kuro smiled and said he would like to get to know Tawa and all of them better. Tova's scars would never fade. The memories were sealed away, but they still affected her. Kuro only wished that Tova would never be exposed to misfortune again. If she was ever in danger, he never wanted to be away from her at that moment again. At least in this life, Kuro was going to protect his little sister. He wanted to do this even though he could no longer be her brother. That same day, Kuro came to the house of a dawn hero named Reiku. More precisely, Reiku woke up screaming in terror when he saw Kuro's face right in front of him. It seemed to him that Kuro had attacked him and cut off his hand again. The girls who were sleeping next to him called out to the Reiku herself. They hoped he was alright, but the Reiku ordered them to shut up and get out of sight. Taking only light cloaks with them, the girls hurried out and apologized to him. Whether he was asleep or awake, the hand that had been cut off by the resort still ached. The hero's obsession grew stronger and stronger. Reiku uttered Kuro's name with hatred and promised never to forget it. Shiro greeted Teiga at their pub one day and told him she hadn't seen him in a while. She warned that Kuro wasn't there right now if he was looking for him. It looked like he was busy, all because from now on, Kuro became the black hero and headed with the white hero to a new dungeon. Now the heroes were on the outskirts of the capital in the lair of Puradishashi, a dark attribute. This was the dungeon that their newfound hero Kuro had entered today, all because of one special exception in this dungeon. The demons that escaped from this lair rushed towards the surface. The way to accomplish the task was left to the discretion of the heroes. Such work was very important. During the battle, Kuro called out to Quinn and signaled her. The girl understood everything and used her freeze skill. Quinn ground the nearby targets into shards of ice. Kuro shouted to the Pirasu, leaving another monster on her. Pirasu agreed and aimed at the enemy. She tried to calm down and remember all her training. Pirasu turned to the Ibaru and ordered it to clear this darkness. Thin beams of light like bullets pierced the body of the huge monster and shattered it into pieces. The girl grinned and excitedly exclaimed that she had succeeded in doing so. The boy put his weapon away in its sheath and said they were done on this floor. Quinn suggested that the resort stop for the day. Besides, they couldn't use magic anymore. The hero agreed and said they would continue another day. The group made their way out of the dungeon and their carriage headed back. For a while the girls and the guy sat in silence and thought about their own things. At some point, Pirasu turned to Kuro and thanked him for giving her this opportunity. The light hero blood flowing through the Ganarenga family had diluted over time, as was evident from her today. She was still not strong enough to fight alongside the heroes in battle. Yet as a descendant of a light hero and as an admired Kuro, she could not give up. Just having the honor of discussing this with him brought her joy. She had to become even stronger and strong enough to protect people. Guy believed that if she had a goal, all that was left to do was to channel the right effort. By doing so, she was already becoming stronger. The hero also wanted to thank Quinn for helping him, as he thought she was indeed very strong. Quinn replied that it was nothing special. The hero finally found his sister and believed that now he was just living the daily routine. Suddenly their wagon stopped unscheduled, which seemed strange to the heroes. Kuro looked outside and asked the soldier what was wrong. The soldier hesitated to answer and tried to say that there was someone in front of them. The same girl with ponytails was standing on the road, but no one understood what she was doing here. Quinn immediately turned pale and suggested that they run away from her quickly. Kuro refused and exclaimed that they couldn't do that. Come to think of it, even at the ceremony Quinn looked at her with disgust. The wind hero poked her finger at the hero and said it was him. He had been stalking her own herself lately. She exclaimed that if she had known that at the ceremony, she would have cut the black hero there. The girl was not going to forgive him, for oneself and she were firmly bound by love. Pirasu blushed and covered her mouth with her hand. Kuro also had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. Harufi found herself taken aback when she saw the same stern gaze of the Quinn that looked at her like an insect. She thought that such a cold attitude towards her who had come for love was simply marvelous. It seemed to Kuro that, by all appearances, she was completely devoted to Quinn. He wondered what the relationship between them was like, but Quinn replied that there was nothing special about it. When Quinn first became a hero, she attacked her and switched roles with her. This may have been the reason for this. Judging from her story, Kuro realized what was going on. Kiro smiled and replied that if he was stronger, then there would be no more problems with her. It seemed to Harufi that the guy relied heavily on his abilities, but to her, it was a very good thing. It had to be decided who was more worthy of being around Quinn herself. Harufi and Kiro stood opposite each other. Hirasu fearfully grabbed her head and thought that it would happen again. Even though she had said it many times, conflicts between heroes were forbidden. The guy asked her not to worry, as it was just a friendly banter battle. Of course, he had his own agenda in this. The Black Eater caused too much mental contamination. If he didn't find a way to fight without it, he would be finished. He would have to use only black and the abilities absorbed by it. His opponent was still a hero after all, so Kiro could test his skills on her. The girl decided to attack first and use the final cut. In an instant, the boy's body was chopped in half. Hirasu was shocked at this sight, but Quinn looked completely cold-blooded. Harufi realized that it was Kiro's clone that had turned into a black attribute. The guy wanted to strike back, but Harufi deftly dodged his sword. The girl exclaimed that he was pretty good with the sword, so she would graciously give him 10 points for it. He used the puppet control ability he absorbed from the Sagirusu to create a clone of the black man. The boy was glad that everything was going according to plan now. He had seen this final cut back at the ceremony, and first needed to understand how it worked. And in order to do that, the Kiro created many clones from the black attribute. Harufi exclaimed that his power was very handy, but her final cut would not yield to it. With those words, the girl stood on her toes and began to spin rapidly. She created a vortex to destroy all the Kiro clones at once. The wind sickle shot down the clones and made them dissolve into thin air. Harufi asked not to tell her that this was all of his power. She asked to be shown the power spoken of in the legends. Harufi destroyed almost all of the Kiro clones and asked to be shown the power of the black hero. The final cut was the power to cut everything in its path. The blade she released completely severed the Kiro clone. At the same time, it severed his real body, or at least that was what it was supposed to be. It seemed to the girl that the Kiro was apparently not that bad. Blocking the slashing hero's attack, the Kiro got his hands on a new weapon. Hirasu was shocked that the hero was fine after that attack. She assumed that he had absorbed it with black, but the Quinn replied that was not the case. Hirasu then turned her attention to the Kiro sword. He was holding the sacred sword of Kokasha Musu. The king of Darutora had a miraculous power called the Act of God. Heroes were endowed with equipment endowed with special powers by the Act of God. Our hero, however, received an indestructible sword. It is said that divine blood flows in the royal family. At least this indestructible sword seemed real. This sword could block attacks that average black magic couldn't absorb. Kiro knew that he had to use what he could. Kiro exclaimed that she wanted to see what black was capable of and ordered her to watch carefully. Harufi exclaimed that it was excellent and said she would finally cut him and his power. It seemed to Porras that this fight was becoming disgusting. But Quinn meanwhile noticed that Kiro was enjoying this battle. The heroes were moving so fast that only lightning rays of light were seen instead. They destroyed everything in their path and chopped down trees in one fell swoop. Harufi was impressed and didn't think the hero could follow her at such speed. She said she would give him 10 or even 20 points. The hero thought she was faster at the ceremony than she was now, so he would have to use something else. Kiro used black unification and covered himself with black armor. The guy said that her speed wasn't that bad and his eyes couldn't keep up with her. He wondered what she would do other than play hide and seek with him. The girl suggested that he didn't like children's games. Kiro looked up sharply and saw her at the top of the slope. As expected of a black hero, he was quite strong, so the girl asked permission to give him a small reward for it. Harufi purposely cut the edge of the slope she was standing on and rolled with him onto the hero. The girl exclaimed that she would show him a graceful dance of blades. She cut the whole block into pieces and asked to feel the power of her weapons on him. In response, the guy used black burial and summoned black bayonets that sprouted through the ground. The bayonets pierced the rocks, but the Kiro felt that it would be a waste of magic to absorb them. While Kiro was thinking about it, he didn't notice the Harufi knock the sword out of his hand. The girl was right behind the unarmed guy and said that this way the victory was still hers. The hero already realized that she wanted to make full use of the final cut that could wipe out both him and the black attribute. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. The hero turned towards her and used her own ultimate cut in black form against her. Two completely identical attacks of different attributes collided with each other and created a powerful explosion. Harufi was thrown backwards while the Kiro landed neatly on his feet. The girl couldn't believe that her final cut had been repeated. Now that she had opened up, the guy could draw his sword from the black and strike. In a split second his blade was straight at the Harufi's throat. He asked her if she could then continue the fight. Harufi admitted defeat and said she could no longer continue the fight. Hirasu ran towards Kuro. She was glad that no one was injured, but Kuro could not agree with her. In truth, he had barely won. As expected of a slashing hero, she was strong. Harufi knew that Kuro had absorbed the final cut, but the final blow was a surprise. After losing his sacred sword, he immediately met her attack. The girl thought she had been fooled by him. Most importantly, at the end of the battle, the slashing consumed the black attribute. Horace thought the Harufi was talking to herself. Kuro assumed that she was analyzing what had happened during the battle and suggested that she be left to her own devices. Either way, their case was settled. At that moment, the hero received a new message from Ikona. Ikona was asking Kuro for help. It concerned the Shiro-san and the Taiga-san. When the boys returned home, a terrible picture appeared before their eyes. The whole pub where they lived had been destroyed and was on fire. Next to the burning building lay a body that had been stabbed with a sword. Looking at the corpses of people, Kuro could not understand how this could have happened. He came to his senses when someone suddenly called out to him. Kuro noticed a wounded Taiga with an Ikona standing next to him. Kuro rushed to their aid along with the others. Kuro hoped that Taiga was alright and asked where the Shiro had gone. Taiga replied that judging from the attacker's clothes, it was definitely a hero. It was he who took the Shiro with him and arranged all this. Somewhere in the dungeon, Reiku had tied Shiro to one of the columns with chains. He grinned and said that the feisty girl had changed a lot. He hadn't seen her for a long time, but she already had the body of a real woman. True, he would like to make her use the device to summon her hero first. Reiku felt that he had no guarantee that Kuro would get here in one piece. The crimson-haired hero, consumed with ruthless rage, thought about what Kuro would do in such a situation. Kuro hoped the Taiga was feeling better by now, and the adventurer replied that he was fine. The hero wanted to know what had happened and asked the Taiga about it. The Taiga was horrified and said that it all happened in an instant. It was all the scoundrel's fault. A hero of the dawn named Reiku had done all this with his own hands. Hearing the noise outside, they came out of the building to join the fight. However, the hero's terrible power was able to defeat them even though they joined together. He then displayed his sword on the Ekinu, declaring that until they gave them the Shiro, he would kill one by one. Of course, this was unacceptable and they were all ready to fight. However, to protect everyone, the Shiro came out and surrendered themselves. Reiku wanted to make her a decoy with which he would lure the Kuro out. That bastard took the Shiro with him, and those words were his last before leaving. Taiga was furious that there was nothing they could do but silently watch it. Kuro realized that he had been harboring a grudge all this time and used the Shiro to lure him out. Ikona was shaking with fear. The frightened girl stated that this was the same man who had destroyed her home village. He was the one who destroyed the Hyborania. Kuro approached the girl who was gripped by terror and fear. The girl told that before she was captured, she saw his face clearly. So recently, when he pointed his sword at her, he said something to her. The guy smirked and thought with amusement that she was the brat with the Hyborania. Ikona cried out in tears that this was the same person who killed all the people in her village and in this store. Kuro was furious that this man had destroyed Ikona's house twice. Kuro asked the Pirasa to give him a report. The girl went back and said that apparently there were no casualties. They were treating everyone, starting with the most injured. Quinn had something to offer. The woman said that if she used her white power of denial, they could fix everything. It would be like it never happened. And if that's what Kuro wanted, she could do it. Taiga reached out to the hero and asked him not to do this. He appreciated it, but they didn't have time right now. Quinn's mana wasn't limitless, so he would want to save her power to save Shiro. As they were talking, a carriage approached them. The man that got out of it and apologized for the delay. It was the rest of the heroes who were going to help them and take the wounded to Arufi. Arufi said she would examine them. Rukus arrived with her and bowed to Kuro and apologized for this turn of events. The fact is that he was aware of the behavior of the Reiku, so he had placed some guards here. However, this disaster still happened, all because of his naivety. From now on, he would like to ask for permission to help them. Reiku must be stopped, so Rukius suggested that they join forces. The hero wanted to find out from Rukius what the Reiku was. He didn't understand how such a scoundrel could be made a hero even with his unpleasant character. His abilities were very useful to the country. The Reiku's heat and light magic could heal both demons and humans, and it had a large area of effect. He was reprimanded for his tendency to overdo it, but since his magic was very effective in battle, no one really tried to put a stop to it. Despite being called a nation of heroes, their nation has suffered greatly from a shortage of heroes in recent years. 6 years ago, there was an incident that resulted in the death of 6 heroes. The war was still raging. To quell the public's fear, they even mined the titles of mages like Tova and he who had no colored attributes. In short, despite his character, He became a hero due to the demand for his fighting skills. To their great shame, this was exactly what happened. However, Riku's action this time could not be ignored and had to be sent to hell. He had injured his subordinates, attacked the place, and stubbornly tried to fight Kuro. Now the hero had to realize how serious this was. Thanks to the glass in this world, the news of this incident had just been transmitted to the royal capital area. If the Reiku were to do something, someone would have to inform them soon. Rukius received the message and told Kuro that there was an unpleasant development. Reiku's magic has now been noticed. It was in a place with super high difficulty for heroes only. This place was the ultimate labyrinth of the Gasenyukusu. Reiku exclaimed that the view here was simply wonderful and asked Shiro for his opinion. This dungeon was so difficult that only heroes could enter it. In this dungeon, Guardian-class monsters roamed around every corner. Shiro asked Reiku why he was doing all this. She tried to explain to the hero about the consequences. When this incident became public, he would be stripped of his hero status and despised as a criminal. There will be no more room in this world for someone like him. Reiku smirked and replied that unfortunately for her, that won't happen. Reiku reminded her that there was more to Arcry than just Darutora. For example, the Akusubeon Empire would definitely welcome him with open arms. He considered himself special. He had a special body and special magic, all given to him by God. Reiku saw nothing wrong with using his gifts as he pleased, and as long as he had that hero power, he would always be free. Shiro asked him to stop and not do that, but apparently Reiku didn't care. Shiro remembered his mother, who probably helped him because she didn't want him to become like this. Shiro wouldn't want this little thing to ruin his whole life. With tears in her eyes, the girl asked not to use her second chance to hurt people. She believed that the second chance was given to him to make his life happy. Reiku grabbed the girl's breast in rage and squeezed it with all his might. The hero thought that this girl was as annoying as her mother. He believed that she did not save him at all. He was just using this woman to survive. Reiku thought he was special, and his needs were paramount. He is justice itself, and the people standing in his way were evil. Reiku shouted that the pesky villains must be destroyed. That's why he was going to kill Kuro. Shiro was hurt to the point of tears that her words would never reach this man. Now she realized that it was all useless. Reiku had lost his mind, and Shiro would absolutely hate for Kuro to fight him. After some time, Kuro received a message from Shiro. The girl begged him not to come here, but Kuro along with the others were already rushing to her rescue. Kuro was not about to leave her in the clutches of the Reiku.